Hey guys, tonight we journey back thousands of years to the banks of the Nile, to a civilization known for pyramids, pharaohs and gods that watched your every move. But behind the gold masks and grand temples lies a much harsher reality. Today we're asking what would happen if you lived just one day in ancient Egypt, because let me tell you, the sun isn't the only thing that will roast you alive. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Before you even open your eyes, you feel it, a weightless, oppressive heat that has already seeped through the walls of your small home. There's no gentle dawn here, no soft morning light filtering through blinds. The sun doesn't rise in ancient Egypt, it attacks. It's already blasting through the single opening of your reed hut, like it's auditioning for the role of unforgiving sky god. And from the intensity of the light, it's already landed the part. There are no curtains, no shades, and certainly no air conditioning. That particular luxury is still several millennia away. For now, you have only the raw, unfiltered power of the desert, baking everything in its path, including you, well before breakfast. You're lying on a scratchy straw mat, laid directly on the packed earth floor. Over you is a single linen sheet, but it feels more like a suggestion than a form of protection. It's a thin, almost translucent veil against a world that is rapidly heating up. You were dreaming of the cool Nile breeze, the one promised in all those travel documentaries that don't exist yet. But that breeze, if it ever truly existed, probably died sometime around 2800 BC. The air in your hut is thick still and already carries the scent of dust-dried reeds and the faint, ever-present aroma of the nearby river. You push the sheet aside, the fabric sticking to your skin with the first layer of sweat that the day will demand from you. As you sit up, your joints ache. The straw mat offers zero orthopedic support, a concept as foreign here as Wi-Fi. You glance around your home. It's a simple one-room structure made of mud bricks reinforced with straw and topped with a roof of palm fronds. It's functional, keeping out the worst of the night's chill, but it's no match for the solar furnace that is the Egyptian day. By the time you stumble outside, squinting against the blinding glare, the temperature is already flirting with 90 degrees Fahrenheit, or around 32 Celsius. And it's not even mid-morning. The sun doesn't just shine here, it presses down on you, a physical weight on your shoulders. Your wardrobe for the day is simple. A linen kilt, a short wraparound skirt that offers maximum airflow and minimum protection. It's the standard uniform for the working class, and it's about as useful against ultraviolet radiation as wearing tissue paper in a sauna. You don't even think about sunscreen. There's no aloe vera, no SPF 50, not even a floppy hat with a logo from a beach resort you've never visited. The ancient Egyptians did in fact have protective oils and lotions, but these were luxuries reserved for the wealthy elite, or those who worked in the temples. Historians still argue whether these concoctions of plant oils and minerals offered genuine protection or were primarily cosmetic and symbolic. For you, they are completely out of reach. Your best option, and it's a grim one, is to smear yourself with something. Mud is a popular choice, providing a temporary crusty barrier. Or, if you're feeling particularly adventurous, you could use crocodile dung. Yes, you heard that right. Some ancient texts suggest that this was believed to have protective, if not fragrant, properties. It might keep you from turning into a human torch. The emphasis is on might. You decide to take your chances with the sun for now. By midday, you know the stones under your feet will be hot enough to cook lentils, and the very air will seem to shimmer with heat. Shade is a currency more valuable than grain. Trees are a rarity, mostly clustered near the Nile or within temple complexes. You might get a moment's relief hiding behind a mud brick wall, but even that wall will be sweating by noon. You, on the other hand, will look like someone threw you into a clay oven and forgot to set a timer. And you'd better not complain. Complaining would be an insult to Ra, the mighty sun god who is currently piloting his solar barge across the sky. In ancient Egypt, the sun wasn't just weather, it was divine authority made manifest. The hotter the day, the more powerful Ra was feeling. So if you're melting into a puddle on the ground, you should probably see it as a spiritual compliment. In short, surviving even the first few hours of a day in ancient Egypt requires a level of hydration you can't yet afford, a deep sense of humility before the gods, and an ironclad tolerance for feeling like a slowly roasting chicken. And this, you remind yourself as you shield your eyes and look toward the shimmering ribbon of the Nile, is just the morning. You're finally out of bed, or rather, off your scratchy straw mat, and the good news is the Nile is just a short walk away. The bad news is you can already smell it before you see it. Yes, the mighty Nile, the life-giver of ancient Egypt revered as Hapi, the god of the annual flood, the very reason civilization here even exists. It is sacred, divine, the artery of the nation. But let's be honest for a moment. Up close, it also smells like a fish market had a bad breakup with a swamp. The air is thick with the scent of wet earth, decaying vegetation, and the undeniable tang of aquatic life. The banks are buzzing with a symphony of flies, frogs, and things that probably shouldn't have legs but do. This is the reality behind the poetic hymns. Still, this is where you bathe. Soap in the modern sense hasn't been invented yet, and even if it had been, it would be a luxury far beyond your means. Instead, you wade into the shallows, the cool water a blessed relief against your already sun-warmed skin. You look around, you are not alone. This is the communal bathroom for your entire village. Neighbours, children, and even livestock share the same murky water. A few yards away, a woman is pounding wet linen against a smooth, flat rock. Further down, a small herd of goats is drinking their hooves, churning the muddy bank. Privacy is a concept that doesn't really apply here. You simply find your spot and get on with it. For cleansing, you rely on the freshest technology of the day sand. That's right. You scoop up handfuls of the wet, coarse sand from the riverbed and begin to rub it vigorously against your skin. This is exfoliation the Egyptian way. It's like nature's own sandpaper, but significantly less effective and with a much higher chance of leaving you with tiny scratches. You scrub away the sweat and grime from yesterday's labour, the abrasive grains working into every fold of your skin. It's a harsh, gritty process, but it's all you have. Historians still argue about the extent to which ancient Egyptians understood the concept of microscopic pathogens. While they were meticulous about certain forms of purity, especially in religious contexts, their understanding of waterborne diseases was likely non-existent. They saw the river as a divine gift, and its life-giving properties were not to be questioned. As you rinse off the sand, you keep a wary eye on the deeper water. The Nile is not just a bathtub, it's a cafeteria for some of its larger residents. Crocodiles, the sacred animals of the god Sobek, are a constant threat. They are masters of camouflage, and you know that what looks like a floating log could very well be a patient predator. Hippos, though they may look slow and comical to a modern eye, are notoriously aggressive and territorial, and an encounter with either would be your last. You wash quickly, never straying too far from the bank, your senses on high alert. You emerge from the water feeling slightly less sticky, moderately cleaner, and only moderately more worried about leeches. Now for the laundry. Your one other linen kilt needs washing. You find a suitable rock and begin the laborious process of pounding the dirt out of the fabric, just as you saw the woman doing earlier. You beat the cloth, soak it, and beat it again, praying that a crocodile doesn't mistake the rhythmic splashing for a tasty midday snack. Oh, and just to make things more interesting, let's not forget the occasional sewage runoff from upstream. Every village, every town, every city along the Nile uses the river as its primary disposal system. Remember, people, their animals, and the occasional funeral boat all share this water, and yet somehow this is considered clean. If you were a city dweller in a major hub like Memphis or Thebes, you might be lucky enough to have access to a public basin or cistern fed by canals. But for the vast majority of the population, it's Nile or nothing. There are no private showers, no faucets with running water. Your entire existence is tethered to this one magnificent and deeply contaminated source. As you finish your washing, you watch the other morning rituals unfold. Water jars are filled, balanced skillfully on heads, and carried back to mud brick houses before the midday heat turns the clay paths into toast. An ibis pecks nonchalantly around your ankles, looking for a stray snail, acting like it pays rent for the space. It's a daily ritual that is simultaneously spiritual, necessary, and slightly traumatic. So yes, the Nile is sacred. It irrigates your fields, it provides fish for your meals, it quenches your thirst, and it offers you a place to wash. But don't let the grand depictions in temple murals fool you. It is no sparkling oasis. In reality, it's part miracle, part biohazard, and all you've got. You wring out your clean kilt, sling it over your shoulder to dry in the sun, and pick up your own clay jar to fill with drinking water for the day. You'll let the sediment settle before you drink it, of course. That's a trick everyone knows. You take one last look at the river, a swirling brown expanse of life and death, and head back toward your hut. The sun is higher now, and the day's real work is about to begin. By now, you've bathed in the crocodile-infested Nile and sandpapered yourself semi-clean. Your body, already feeling the oppressive heat, feels like a baked fig. It's time for breakfast, the most important and least glamorous meal of your ancient Egyptian day. As you return to your hut, the smell of baking bread from a communal oven nearby wafts through the air. It's a comforting, familiar scent, but you know better than to get your hopes up for a culinary delight. Let's set some realistic expectations. There are no eggs, Benedict, no fresh fruit bowls, and absolutely no iced lattes brewed with single origin beans. Breakfast in ancient Egypt is less of a meal and more of a tactical refueling operation. You enter your home and find your portion of the morning's rations waiting for you. You sit on a low three-legged stool if you're lucky enough to own one. Otherwise, you just squat in the corner like everyone else. The centerpiece of your meal, and indeed of the entire Egyptian diet, is bread. Lots of it. But this isn't the light, fluffy loaf you might imagine. This is dense, coarse, and often as chewy as a leather sandal. It's made from emmer wheat or barley grains that are tough and require significant processing. The grain is ground by hand between two heavy stones, a method that inevitably introduces fine particles of sand and stone into the flour. So don't be surprised if there's a distinct crunch in your slice. It's not a special topping, it's just an uninvited ingredient from the grinding stones. You could call it a daily dose of essential minerals if you wanted to be optimistic. This constant grit is a major reason why ancient Egyptian dental remains show extreme wear, with teeth often worn down, flat to the gums by middle age. Accompanying your rock-like loaf is the other staple beer, but again, banish any modern notions of a crisp, bubbly craft ale. The beer of ancient Egypt is thick, cloudy, and served at the ambient temperature of a warming desert morning. It's more like a thin, lukewarm porridge than a pint. It's essentially liquid bread packed with calories and only vaguely fermented. Imagine a medieval smoothie with the faint sour taste of cereal and survival. The brewing process, which involved crumbling partially baked bread into water and letting it ferment, was one of the safest ways to consume calories and fluids. The boiling involved in some stages of brewing helped to kill off many of the parasites and bacteria found in the Nile water you just collected. That's why everyone, even children, drank it. It wasn't about being edgy, it was a matter of public health. It was safer than the water. You tear off a chunk of the gritty bread and dip it into your clay cup of beer, letting it soften just enough to be chewed without risking a cracked tooth. As you chew your sand-infused dough and sip your grain sludge, a cloud of flies buzzes around your head, treating your meal as a public buffet because for them it is. You swat at them with one hand, hold your cup with the other, and try not to think too hard about the fact that this is likely the best and most substantial meal you'll have all day. If you are very lucky, and we mean very lucky, you might have an onion, or a few green onions to go with your carb-on-foam combo. Onions were a staple considered to possess spiritual significance and strength. Workers on the pyramids were famously paid in part with radishes, garlic and onions. There's a scholarly debate about whether this was their entire wage or just a supplementary ration, but their importance is undeniable. Protein is a rare treat. It would only be available if someone in your family had caught a fish and didn't immediately trade it for something else. Perhaps you have a few dried dates, sticky and sweet, a small luxury to cut through the blandness. This meal isn't about flavour, it's about function. It's a calculated intake of carbohydrates designed to fuel your body for the hours of hard labour that lie ahead. There's no lingering over coffee, no reading the morning papyrus. You eat quickly, efficiently, because the sun is climbing higher, and the overseer is already gathering the workers. You finish the last of your bread, drain the thick dregs of your beer, and stand up feeling not so much satisfied as simply fueled. Your stomach is full heavy with a dense mixture of barley and wheat. It's enough. It has to be. You step back out into the glare, ready to face the fields or the quarry. Bon appetit, you suppose. The taste of sand and sour beer lingers in your mouth, the official flavour of another day of survival. You've had your gritty bread, your chunky beer, and just enough rest to call yourself functional. Now, it's time to work. And trust me, ancient Egyptian labour makes modern burnout look like a spa day. Unless you're a scribe, a priest, or a member of the royal family, which, let's be honest, your job is pure muscle sweat and dust. There is no air-conditioned cubicle, no scheduled coffee breaks, and certainly no ergonomic chairs. Your reality is sweat sand, and the constant nagging risk of collapsing from exhaustion before noon. The concept of a weekend doesn't exist. You work until the job is done, or until a religious festival provides a temporary reprieve. If you're a farmer, which is the most common profession, you'll be ankle-deep in the rich black Nile mud by sunrise. The work is dictated by the 3 seasons of the Egyptian calendar: Akhet, the inundation; Pere, the growing, sowing; and Shemu, the harvest. During the growing season, you are tending to crops of barley, emmer, wheat, flax, and vegetables. You'll be pulling weeds by hand, your back bent under the relentless gaze of an overseer, whose primary hobby seems to be yelling. You use simple, almost primitive tools. The primary tilling instrument is a wooden plough, sometimes pulled by oxen, but just as often by you and another labourer. It's brutally inefficient, requiring immense physical strength to cut through the soil. For harvesting, you use a crude wooden sickle set with sharp flint blades. If your back hurts, congratulations. That means it's working. If you're not a farmer, you might be a labourer on one of the pharaohs' monumental construction projects. This is where things get even more biblical. Imagine hauling multi-ton blocks of limestone or granite for a temple or pyramid construction. You're working barefoot, dragging massive stones up ramps made of gravel, mud, and sheer prayer. There's no OSHA here, no safety regulations. If you trip and a block crushes your foot, that's a personal problem. You'll likely get a shrug from the foreman and be left to fend for yourself. Job security is non-existent. An injury that prevents you from working is essentially a death sentence. Perhaps you work in a quarry, chipping away at rock faces under that blazing sun. The air is thick with limestone dust that coats your throat and lungs, leading to a condition modern doctors would call silicosis. Or maybe you're working on a tomb in the Valley of the Kings. That's another level of grind entirely. You spend your days in the dark, stuffy confines of a rock-cut chamber, hammering away at limestone with a chisel and mallet, carving out burial chambers for people who will get to rest for eternity, a luxury you will never know. The irony is as thick as the dust. And if you make a mistake and damage a relief of the pharaoh, let's just say your career prospects might involve a permanently sealed chamber and a nasty curse. And if you're a woman, you're certainly not off the hook. While men dominate, the heavy construction and field labour domestic work is its own form of intense physical exertion. You're grinding grain for hours, a repetitive, back-straining task. You're hauling heavy jars of water from the Nile, weaving linen on a vertical loom, preparing food over a smoky fire, and caring for multiple children. And on top of all that, you are still expected to help in the fields during the crucial harvest season. Your only break is when the baby naps for 7 minutes while you try to prepare dinner. There's a quirky but telling historical fact found in the records of the village of Deir el-Medina, home to the artisans who worked on the tombs in the Valley of the Kings. These records show that workers actually organised the first known labour strike in history around 1157 BC. Their official complaint: they hadn't received their rations of grain. It's a powerful reminder that even under a god-king, human beings have their limits. But such an act was incredibly risky and rare. For most, you simply wipe the sweat from your brow with the sleeve of your tunic and keep moving. Slowing down means falling behind. Falling behind means someone else gets your grain quota and you get the blame. There's no clocking out at 5 p.m. The sun is your supervisor. When it finally begins its descent painting the western sky in hues of orange and purple, you crawl home half alive, caked in a mixture of dust and dried sweat. You dream of softer sandals, a less aggressive sun god, and perhaps a beer that doesn't taste like porridge. Work in ancient Egypt isn't just hard, it's a full-body, full-life commitment to survival day after day, until your body gives out or your overseer decides you're no longer worth feeding. And that's not even the worst of it. The psychological weight of your station is just as heavy as any limestone block. After sweating your soul out in the fields or the quarry, you might be tempted to grumble. Maybe something small under your breath, a little, "This job stinks," or "Why am I hauling this rock for a man I'll never meet?" Stop right there. Because in ancient Egypt, complaining isn't just frowned upon, it's potentially an act of treason. And the reason for this is simple, profound, and utterly terrifying. Your boss isn't just a ruler. He's a literal god on earth. The pharaoh is not some politician who got elected, nor is he merely a king born into a lucky family. He is the living, breathing, human embodiment of the god Horus, the son of Ra, chosen by the heavens themselves to maintain Mars at the fundamental concept of divine cosmic order, truth and justice. In other words, the entire universe is in a delicate balance, and the pharaoh is the linchpin holding it all together. If the Nile floods bountifully and the harvest is good, you thank the pharaoh's divine power. If the flood fails and famine sweeps the land, well, maybe you and your neighbours didn't pray hard enough or show enough devotion to the god king. The blame is deflected downwards. Questioning his authority, therefore, isn't just rude, it's blasphemy of the highest order. It's like questioning the laws of physics. Speaking ill of him, even in the privacy of your mud brick hut, is a risk. A neighbour could overhear. A local official might be looking to curry favour. The consequences could be a swift and public encounter with a whip, a new set of shackles, or a very early unscheduled trip to the underworld, likely without any of your favourite burial goods. There are no constitutional rights, no freedom of speech. The only right you have is the right to serve and obey. You see his face everywhere. It's carved into colossal statues that loom over temple entrances. It's painted on the walls of tombs and public buildings. His name enclosed in a protective cartouche is inscribed on everything from monuments to small scarab amulets. Historians still debate the exact nature of the average Egyptian's relationship with the pharaoh. Was it one of genuine, fervent worship, or was it a more pragmatic acceptance of an unchallengeable power structure? The answer is likely a complex mix of both, varying from person to person and dynasty to dynasty. But for you on the ground, the effect is the same. He is omnipresent, and don't ever expect to see him in person. If you're a commoner, the closest you'll likely get is catching a glimpse of a glittering golden bark floating down the Nile during a major religious festival. You might see a distant figure shaded by fans surrounded by an entourage of priests and guards. Blink, and he's gone back to a palace you will never enter, a world of unimaginable luxury, surrounded by enough gold to finance a small civilization, which, fun fact, he basically does. The entire economy of Egypt is in essence the pharaoh's personal property. The land, the livestock, the mines, the people, it all belongs to him. You are merely a tenant on his divine estate. If you are one of the slightly more fortunate individuals working on a royal project, say, carving a statue the size of a mountain, you're expected to serve with a sense of divine joy. At least, that's what the official state propaganda says. And you'll say it too out loud to anyone who asks. You'll profess your undying loyalty and your profound honour to be toiling for 14 hours a day. Because pretending you're thrilled to be carving stone is infinitely safer than the alternative. Think about rebellion, don't. Pharaohs crush uprisings with a speed and brutality that would make you beg for the simplicity of hauling rocks again. The Egyptian military led by the pharaoh himself was a formidable force. Just ask the last village that tried to withhold its grain tax. Oh wait, you can't. That village and everyone in it probably no longer exists. There's a quirky historical tidbit that underscores this. Some of the earliest peace treaties in recorded history, like the Treaty of Kadesh between Ramesses II and the Hittites, were framed not as negotiations between equals, but as acts of the pharaoh's magnanimous will, bringing order to chaotic foreign lands. Even peace was a projection of his absolute power. So, yes, The pharaoh is divine, and you're just a tiny, insignificant cog in his vast cosmic machine. You are lucky to be allowed to sweat in his name. Now stop your grumbling, pick up your rope, and get back to pulling that multi-ton stone. Ra is watching, but more importantly, so is his son on Earth. And his foremen have whips. The heat of the sun suddenly feels like the least of your worries. If you thought surviving the sun, the work and the God King's invisible authority was hard, just wait until you realize that in ancient Egypt, sand is your roommate, your co-worker, your primary food seasoning, and your mortal enemy. It is everywhere. In your clothes, in your bed, in your water, in your lungs. There is no escaping it. It is the silent, gritty substrate of your entire existence. You could be working in the fields, praying in a temple, sleeping on your mat, or trying to mind your own business in the marketplace, and suddenly a gust of hot wind will sweep by. In an instant, your face feels like it's been subjected to a grainy exfoliation experiment you didn't sign up for. Let's start with your clothes. You wear linen, as we've established. It's light, it's breathable, and it's about as effective at keeping sand out as a screen door is at holding back soup. Fine particles of silica and dust slide right through the weave of the fabric. The sand clings to your sweaty skin, creating a sticky, abrasive paste. It finds its way into places you didn't even know had creases, causing constant chafing and irritation. You are perpetually mildly uncomfortable. Now, let's talk about food again, because the sand is already there. Every loaf of that dense barley bread you eat is basically a sand trap. Since the flour was ground between two large flat stone slabs, little bits of the stone and ambient grit inevitably made their way into the dough. Archaeologists and paleopathologists who have studied Egyptian mummies consistently find that their teeth are worn down to an astonishing degree. This wasn't just from a tough diet, it was from chewing on stone dust every single day of their lives. Egyptians didn't just eat their wheat, they ate their millstones too, one microscopic bite at a time. Imagine chewing your breakfast while also inadvertently filing your molars. That's your daily reality. And if you thought your house was a sand-free zone, think again. Your mud brick home with its single doorway and small high window has gaps, crevices, and no glass. These openings are perfect portals for wind-blown sand to enter. It settles as a fine layer on everything you own. Your floors are perpetually dusty. Your cooking pots have a film of grit at the bottom. Your sleeping mat is basically a sand pit disguised as furniture. You sweep the floor with a bundle of reeds, but it's a futile gesture. An hour later, the dust has returned, reclaiming its territory. Shoes are at best an optional accessory. Most Egyptians went about their daily lives barefoot. This means you are always just one step away from turning the soles of your feet into battered leather sandals of their own. The hot ground is one thing, but the constant friction of sand against your skin is another. If you are fortunate enough to own footwear, it's usually a basic pair of sandals made from woven reeds, or for the more affluent leather. They're fashionable perhaps, but not remotely protective. Sand gets in under and around the straps, rubbing your skin raw. Then there are the sandstorms, known as Khamsin in the region today. These are Egypt's version of a sudden angry slap from the gods. One moment you're having a conversation with a neighbour. The next you are both spitting dust and feeling like someone has dumped an entire beach directly into your eye sockets. The sky turns a hazy, ominous yellow-orange. Visibility drops to near zero, and everyone around you becomes a vaguely coughing silhouette. You huddle in your hut, covering your face with a piece of linen, and wait for it to pass. But even after the storm subsides, the sand remains a fine powder, coating the entire world. There's a scholarly debate about how much this constant exposure to sand and dust contributed to respiratory illnesses. While direct evidence is hard to come by, analysis of mummified lung tissue has sometimes revealed significant deposits of sand and carbon, suggesting that lung disease was a persistent problem. It's a quirky and rather grim tidbit that your environment is actively trying to suffocate you from the inside out. In short, sand is the roommate who never pays rent, never cleans up, and never leaves. It's the unlisted spice in every meal, and the silent grinding enemy of your eyes, lungs, teeth, and dignity. It's not just the backdrop of your life, it's a part of your body now. And no, you can't just wash it off. You already tried that in the Nile, which as you recall is probably full of more sand anyway. So, you've stepped on something sharp in the field, been bitten by something strange near the river, or you've simply come down with a raging fever. In a world teeming with invisible threats, getting sick or injured is not a matter of if, but when. It's time to seek medical care. Just don't expect a sterile waiting room with last year's magazines. You're about to be healed with a fascinating combination of practical science, powerful magic, and sheer, undiluted optimism. First, you'll be taken to see a W pronounced Sunu, the Egyptian word for a doctor or physician. And to be fair, these were some of the most advanced medical practitioners in the ancient world. They had specialised fields, dentistry, ophthalmology, even proctology, which they quaintly called shepherd of the anus. Their knowledge is preserved in incredible documents like the Edwin Smith Papyrus and the Ebers Papyrus, which read like actual medical textbooks detailing diagnoses, treatments and prognoses for a range of ailments. The Edwin Smith Papyrus in particular is remarkably scientific, describing 48 cases of traumatic injury from skull fractures to spinal injuries with a rational, almost modern approach. It even includes cases deemed untreatable, showing a realistic understanding of their limitations. But here's the catch. Science in ancient Egypt always came with a heavy dose of magic. For the Egyptians, illness wasn't just a biological malfunction. It could be caused by a myriad of supernatural forces, a demon that has entered your body, a curse from an enemy, the wrath of a displeased god, or a spiteful ghost. Therefore, any effective treatment had to address both the physical symptoms and the underlying magical cause. Your doctor was often also a priest capable of fighting on both fronts. Let's say you have an infected wound. The SWNW might apply a poultice made of honey mouldy bread and crushed herbs. This sounds bizarre, but it's surprisingly effective. Honey is a natural antibacterial agent. The mouldy bread could have contained a primitive form of penicillin, a quirky tidbit that shows their practical pharmacology was sometimes centuries ahead of its time. But before applying this remedy, the healer will almost certainly chant a protective spell or incantation. The spell might be addressed to a god like Sekhmet, the lioness goddess of both plague and healing, or Isis, the goddess of magic. The idea was to magically subdue the demon causing the infection so that the physical medicine could do its work. Have a splitting headache. You might get a dose of crushed willow bark, a natural source of salicylic acid, the active ingredient in aspirin rubbed into your scalp, while someone recites a hymn to Thoth, the god of wisdom. Or perhaps they'll try something more direct, like tying a band around your head with a carved amulet attached. Suffering from a chest cold? Let's try smearing a mixture of cow dung and dates on your chest and see what happens. Believe it or not, dung from various animals was a common ingredient in the Egyptian pharmacopoeia, though historians still argue whether its perceived benefits were due to some unknown chemical property or purely the placebo effect of a truly potent remedy. Eye infection. A common problem thanks to all that sand and the flies. Time for a paste made from lizard's blood, ochre and beer, applied directly to the eye, plus a heartfelt prayer to Horus, whose divine eye was famously restored after being torn out. Surgery did happen, but it was a last resort. Abscesses were drained, bones were set, and wounds were stitched with linen thread and needles made of bone or copper. But there was no anesthesia beyond perhaps a strong dose of beer or opium. It was mostly a matter of a sharp knife, a steady hand, and a friend to hold your shoulders down while you screamed into a mud brick pillow. And let's not forget the amulets. Your treatment is incomplete without a protective charm. Whether you're giving birth, getting stitched up, or just sneezing a little too loudly, a good doctor-priest will probably hang an ankh, the symbol of life, or an Eye of Horus charm around your neck. This was your metaphysical insurance policy, just in case the real issue was an invisible serpent spirit coiled around your spleen. So yes, Egyptian medicine had its brilliant moments of scientific observation, but for the patient on the receiving end, the experience was a bewildering and often terrifying cocktail of empirical treatment and divine intervention. You better have faith in the gods because your band-aid is quite literally a prayer. You've survived another grueling day in ancient Egypt. You ate your gritty bread, hauled your buckets of silty water, avoided divine wrath from your god-king, and maybe even dodged a sandstorm. You've been treated for an ailment with a poultice that was equal parts effective and alarming. It's time to relax right-wrong, because in ancient Egypt your most important high-stakes test begins only after you die. Death isn't the end. It's just the beginning of an incredibly bureaucratic and perilous journey through the underworld known as the duat. And if you thought your earthly labor overseer was strict, wait until you meet the divine gods of judgment. The entire Egyptian belief system is geared towards ensuring a successful transition into the afterlife. For them, eternity wasn't an abstract concept. It was a destination you had to prepare for meticulously. As soon as you breathe your last, your soul or bar is separated from your physical body. But to survive the journey, your bar needs to be able to return to your preserved body each night. This is why mummification was so crucial. It wasn't just about preserving a corpse, it was about maintaining a permanent home for your spirit. First, your soul guided by gods, like Anubis, the jackal-headed god of embalming, must navigate the treacherous landscape of the Duat. This realm is filled with gates guarded by terrifying demons, lakes of fire, and serpents with legs. To pass, you need the right passwords, spells, and incantations. This is where having a copy of the Book of the Dead comes in handy. This wasn't a single book, but a collection of funerary texts and spells, a personalized spiritual cheat sheet that your family would have purchased at great expense. It contained helpful tips like how to not be eaten by a crocodile in the afterlife, and spell for not rotting. A quirky tidbit, some of these scrolls came with blank spaces, where the deceased's name could be filled in like a divine form letter. Assuming you successfully navigate these hazards, you arrive at the main event, the final judgment in the Hall of Ma'at. Here before a divine tribunal of 42 deities, you must perform the negative confession. You have to address each god by name and declare your innocence of a specific sin. You'll say things like, I have not stolen, I have not lied, I have not caused pain, I have not coveted my neighbour's donkey. You are essentially giving a legal deposition for your entire life, all while hoping the gods believe you. Then comes the dramatic climax, the weighing of the heart. Your heart, which the Egyptians believed to be the seat of intelligence, emotion and memory, is placed on one side of a great golden scale. On the other side is the single delicate feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth, justice, and cosmic order. Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom and writing, stands ready with his scribe's palette to record the verdict. This is the moment of ultimate truth. If your heart is light-free from the burden of sin and wrongdoing, it will balance perfectly with the feather. Congratulations, you have been declared true of voice. You pass the test and are granted entry into the field of reeds, a blissful, idealized version of Egypt, where you can live for eternity in peace and plenty. But if your heart is heavy with lies, cruelty, or maybe just that one time you stole someone's goat, it will tip the scales. And waiting patiently beside the scale is the single most terrifying creature in Egyptian mythology, Amit, the devourer of the dead. She is a grotesque chimera with the head of a crocodile, the forequarters of a lion, and the hindquarters of a hippopotamus, a combination of the three largest man-eating animals the Egyptians knew. Amit doesn't arrest you, she doesn't fine you. She eats your soul. Your heart is thrown to her, and she devours it, utterly destroying your consciousness forever. This is not hell, it is eternal non-existence, complete spiritual annihilation. In a culture so completely obsessed with the idea of eternity, this was the ultimate punishment. Historians still debate whether Amit was a literal entity or a symbolic warning, but for the Egyptians standing before the scales, the threat was very real. One wrong move, one forgotten line, during your confession, and boom, you become lunch for a mythological death hybrid. So as you lie down on your straw mat at the end of a long day, you don't just pray for a good night's sleep, you pray that you've lived a good enough life. Because in ancient Egypt, your final exam is a pass-fail test, and the consequences of failure are absolute. Sleep tight. Here's a plot twist that most people don't expect when they picture ancient Egypt women, at least in a legal sense, had a surprising amount of power and autonomy. In a world where many contemporary and later civilizations treated women as little more than property, Egyptian law granted them a status that was in some ways remarkably progressive. They could own and inherit property-run businesses, enter into legal contracts, sue someone in court, and even file for divorce. But before you pack your bags for a time-traveling girl boss vacation, hold on. because while the legal code might impress you, the day-to-day reality for the vast majority of women was anything but glamorous. Let's start with your legal standing. As a woman, you are not under the permanent legal guardianship of a male relative. You are an individual in the eyes of the law. If your father dies, you can inherit his land alongside your brothers. When you marry, you don't become your husband's property. In fact, prenuptial agreements were a known practice. A marriage contract could specify that the property you brought into the marriage remained yours, and you were entitled to a portion of the couple's shared assets if the marriage ended. If your husband mistreats you or commits adultery, you can take him to the local council of elders and initiate a divorce. This legal framework is a stunning contrast to, say, ancient Athens, where women were legally invisible and lived in seclusion. However, your daily life is governed not by legal theory, but by tradition and grueling physical labour. If you're a woman in a typical farming family, you probably wake up before the sun even thinks about attacking the horizon. Your first task is to grind grain. You kneel before a large sloping stone slab called a saddle quern, and use a smaller heavy handstone to grind barley or emmer into flour. It's a repetitive back-straining motion that you will perform for hours every single day. The constant pressure on your knees and spine will almost certainly lead to arthritis as you age. This task alone chews through both the wheat and your own body. After that, it's off to the Nile to haul water your shoulders, straining under the weight of heavy clay pots. Then it's back home to cook breakfast over a smoky open fire. You spend the rest of your day managing the household, which is a full-time job in itself. You have to care for the children, feed the small domestic animals like goats and geese, bake the day's bread, brew the beer, and weave linen for the family's clothing. Weaving was a major female industry, and the fine quality of Egyptian linen was famous throughout the ancient world. You are in essence a one-woman workforce dressed in a simple linen sheath. There is no me time, no spa days, and definitely no paid maternity leave. Childbirth. The primary expectation for most women is incredibly risky and painful. You give birth at home, often squatting on a pair of bricks attended by a midwife and female relatives. There are no epidurals, no modern disinfectants, and no push playlists featuring relaxing harp music. You are in a hot, crowded room surrounded by incense prayers to fertility goddesses, like Taweret, a pregnant hippo deity, and the very real possibility of fatal complications. Infant mortality rates were sky high, and surviving childbirth was a major life event. A quirky tidbit, some medical papyri describe primitive pregnancy tests, such as having a woman urinate on barley and emmer seeds. If the barley grew, it was a boy. If the emmer grew, it was a girl. If neither grew, she wasn't pregnant. While the gender prediction was pure fantasy, scientists have noted that the estrogen in a pregnant woman's urine can in fact stimulate seed growth, so the test may have had a surprising degree of accuracy in simply detecting pregnancy. Now, if you were lucky enough to be born into a wealthy or noble family, your life would be vastly different. You might learn to read and write, manage large household estates, or become a priestess in the temple of a goddess. If you were born royal, you could wield immense influence as a queen, and in very rare cases even become pharaoh like the formidable Hatshepsut or the legendary Cleopatra VII. But these women were the 1%. For everyone else, your status might be legally recognized, but your reality is physical. You work, you sweat, you bend, you carry, you birth, you bury, and you pray. You are not chained by law, but by the relentless demands of survival. So yes, Egyptian women had rights, a fact that historians still debate the origins of. Was it a legacy of a prehistoric matrilineal society, or simply a practical aspect of a culture that needed everyone to be economically productive? Regardless, these rights mattered. But comfort. That was a luxury reserved for statues and goddesses, not for the woman who is elbow-deep in dough while swatting flies off a sleeping toddler. The sun finally sinks below the horizon, and the oppressive heat of the day begins to relent, replaced by a cool, gentle breeze. The sky, a brilliant canvas of orange, purple and gold, signals the end of your labour. You trudge back from the fields, your muscles aching, your skin caked in dust. But as you leave the world of ancient Egypt behind, our journey is not over. We are now travelling forward in time and across a vast ocean to a different continent and a different mystery. Let the soft hum of the fan carry you across the Atlantic to the heart of ancient Mesoamerica. We find ourselves in a valley surrounded by silent, dormant volcanoes. Before you stands a city, a sprawling metropolis of stone and shadow, larger and more ordered than almost any other city on Earth at its time. Its name, given to it centuries later by the awestruck Aztecs, is Teotihuacan, the place where the gods were born. As you step onto its main thoroughfare, the first thing that strikes you is the scale. This is not a haphazard collection of huts. This is a master-planned urban landscape. You are standing on the Avenue of the Dead, a vast, wide boulevard that runs for more than a mile, stretching towards a colossal pyramid that looms in the distance. The avenue isn't flat. It rises and falls with the terrain, creating a sense of dramatic procession. Flanking you on both sides are the remains of massive stone platforms, temples, and residential compounds, all arranged in a precise, unyielding grid. At its peak, around 450 AD, Teotihuacan was home to over 100,000 people, making it one of the largest cities in the world, rivaling Imperial Rome in population and far surpassing it in geometric precision. But here is the central, unsettling mystery of this place. No one knows who built it. Seriously, to this day, archaeologists have found no written records that name its founders, its kings, or even what the people who lived here called themselves, or their magnificent city. There are no carvings of boastful rulers, no royal tombs with names inscribed, no dynastic histories etched in stone. Teotihuacan is an anonymous giant. It was a civilization that achieved incredible feats of engineering, art, and political influence, and then vanished, leaving behind only its breathtaking silent architecture. Historians still argue about the nature of its government. Was it ruled by a single powerful king whose name was deliberately erased? Or perhaps it was governed by a council of elite families, a theocracy of priests, or some other form of collective rule entirely foreign to our understanding of ancient power structures. You walk down the Avenue of the Dead, your modern footsteps echoing in a place of ancient silence. The sheer manpower required to build this city is staggering. The pyramids and temples are constructed from volcanic stone faced with lime plaster and painted in vibrant colours, though only faint traces of the paint remain today. The air feels heavy with history, with the ghosts of a people we cannot name. Their influence, however, was colossal. Evidence of Teotihuacan's power in the form of its distinctive pottery, obsidian blades, and architectural styles has been found hundreds of miles away in the lands of the Maya and the Zapotec. This was not an isolated kingdom. It was the centre of a vast economic and cultural network. As you continue your walk, you pass the Pyramid of the Sun, a behemoth of stone and earth that rises over 200 feet into the air. Further on, at the end of the avenue, is the Pyramid of the Moon, perfectly framed by the brooding peak of the volcano Cerro Gordo behind it. These were not just buildings. They were man-made mountains, sacred engines designed to align the city with the cosmos. A quirky tidbit: recent archaeological explorations using ground-penetrating radar have discovered a secret tunnel running beneath the Pyramid of the Moon, leading to a chamber filled with ritual offerings, including jade figures, obsidian blades, and the remains of sacrificed animals like pumas and eagles. The city's power was clearly rooted in deep, complex ritual, but your destination tonight lies further down in a sunken plaza just off the main avenue. It is a structure that feels different from the others. While the Great Pyramids inspire awe with their sheer size, this one inspires something else, something closer to fear. It is a temple adorned not with peaceful symbols, but with dozens of snarling, open-mouthed stone serpents. They jut out from the walls as if frozen mid-strike, their fangs bared. This is the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, and as you approach it, you get the unnerving feeling that you are being watched not by ghosts, but by the stone itself. It feels predatory, and you are about to find out why. The Great Pyramids of the Sun and the Moon dominate the Teotihuacan skyline with their stoic, massive presence. They speak of raw power of a society capable of mobilizing thousands of laborers to move mountains of earth and stone. You feel an urge to climb, to stand where priests once stood and survey the entire city laid out before you. You turn towards the larger of the two, the Pyramid of the Sun. It is the third largest pyramid in the world, a colossal structure built in a single massive construction phase around 200 AD. Its base is nearly as large as that of the Great Pyramid of Giza in Egypt, but its slope is gentler, leading your eyes upward along a series of tiered platforms. As you begin your ascent, you climb a steep, reconstructed stone staircase. The steps are high and uneven, and you have to focus on each one. With every footstep, you are rising above the valley floor, the surrounding landscape opening up around you. The air grows thinner, and you can feel the burn in your legs. You imagine what it must have been like for the original inhabitants climbing these steps, not as a tourist, but as a participant in a sacred ritual. Perhaps they carried offerings, or perhaps they were the offerings themselves. The pyramid wasn't just a monument, it was a stage for the grand theatre of their cosmology. You pause halfway up, catching your breath and looking out over the Avenue of the Dead. From this vantage point, the city's incredible design becomes even clearer. The rigid grid, the uniform size of the compounds, the perfect alignment of the structures, it all speaks to a powerful, centralized authority. This was a city built by vision, not by chance. Historians still debate the specific astronomical alignments of the pyramid, but its purpose is clear. It was designed to connect the earth with the heavens. The pyramid's west face is oriented to the point on the horizon where the sun sets on two specific days of the year, August 12th and April 29th. These dates are separated by 260 days, the length of the sacred Mesoamerican ritual calendar. This structure wasn't just sitting on the landscape, it was a giant stone timepiece, a solar clock that marked the sacred rhythms of their universe. As you continue climbing, you notice that the pyramid is not made of solid stone blocks like those in Egypt. It is in fact an enormous mound of sun-dried mud bricks and rubble, faced with cut volcanic stone and originally covered in smooth lime plaster. At the top there would have been a temple now long gone, where the most important rituals were performed hidden from the eyes of the masses below. Finally, you reach the summit. You are breathless both from the climb and from the view. The entire valley of Teotihuacan stretches out before you, a vast panorama of muted greens and browns under a wide, endless sky. The Pyramid of the Moon stands sentinel at the northern end of the avenue, and you can see the sprawling remains of the city's compounds spreading out for miles in every direction. It's here at the top that another of the pyramid's secrets was discovered. In the 1970s, archaeologists found a cave-like tunnel running over 300 feet directly beneath the center of the pyramid, leading to a chamber shaped like a four-leaf clover. This tunnel was almost certainly a sacred spot, possibly a natural cave that was enlarged and incorporated into the pyramid's design. It may have been seen as a place of origin, a symbolic womb from which the first humans or gods emerged. The pyramid wasn't just built to reach the sky, it was built to anchor the city to the sacred underworld beneath it. A quirky tidbit: the chamber contained strange offerings, including pools of liquid mercury and walls dusted with glittering pyrite or fool's gold, likely meant to represent a shimmering, supernatural body of water in the underworld. Standing here, you feel a profound sense of awe mixed with an unsettling sense of ignorance. You are at the heart of a civilization that understood engineering, astronomy, and urban planning on a scale that is hard to comprehend. They built this colossal monument to last in eternity, a testament to their faith and their power, and yet they left no word to tell us who they were. The wind whistles past your ears, carrying with it the silent, unanswered questions of a lost world. The sun begins to set, casting long, deep shadows from the pyramids across the ancient city. It's a beautiful, yet lonely vista. You have climbed a monument built by ghosts. You make your way back down the Great Pyramid steps, descending from the vast open sky back into the world of shadows that now stretches across the Avenue of the Dead. The sheer scale of the Pyramid of the Sun and its lunar counterpart is humbling, a testament to a people's connection with the cosmos. But your journey now takes you away from the main avenue into a massive sunken square, known to archaeologists as the Ciudadela, or the Citadel. This enormous sunken plaza, capable of holding tens of thousands of people, feels different from the open avenue. It feels contained, focused, and deeply unnerving. And at its heart stands the structure you came to see. It is not the largest pyramid in Teotihuacan, but it is by far the most ornate and the most intimidating, the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. Unlike the relatively austere faces of the Sun and Moon pyramids, this temple's facade is a riot of sculptural detail, a symphony of stone aggression. As you draw closer, the setting sun catching the sharp edges of the carvings, you see them clearly. Dozens of them. Protruding from the tiered walls are the three-dimensional heads of a great plumed serpent, its mouth agape, fangs-bared neck, encircled by a collar of feathers. The carving is so vivid, so full of energy, that the heads seem to surge forth from the stone as if frozen mid-strike. They are not peaceful symbols of faith. They are warnings. They are declarations of power. They feel predatory. Alternating with the serpent heads is another equally strange visage. This one is flatter, more abstract, with large, round, goggle-like eyes and a stylized mouth. For many years, scholars identified this as a representation of Tlaloc, the storm god of the later Aztecs. However, more recent interpretations suggest it may be a specific Teotihuacano deity of war storms, and the underworld a divine being whose identity is now lost to us. Together, the two figures repeat in a relentless pattern across the pyramid's face, a visual chant of serpent and storm of life and violent death. The entire structure is a six-tiered stepped pyramid, a mainstream architectural form in Mesoamerica, but its decoration is unique in its ferocity. Historians still argue passionately about the true meaning of these powerful carvings. Are the serpent heads representations of the great deity himself, known to later cultures as Quetzalcoatl, or are they, as some suggest, symbolic portraits of Teotihuacan's rulers, or elite warriors adorned in the divine regalia of the serpent god to display their own divinely sanctioned authority? In a city with no known king lists, this temple might be the closest thing we have to a statement of royal power, a message carved not in text but in volcanic rock. As you stand before it, you notice another more subtle detail. The background of the pyramid face behind the projecting heads is carved with low-relief images of the serpent's body undulating across the stone covered in feathers. And here is a truly quirky and astounding tidbit. The entire facade was once adorned with thousands of real shimmering seashells, painstakingly collected and brought here from both the Pacific and Gulf coasts, hundreds of miles away. Traces of them still remain. Imagine this temple in its heyday, painted in brilliant reds, blues and yellows, the stone serpents glaring down their bodies, shimmering with the iridescent light of countless shells, symbols of water and the underworld. It would have been a dazzling, terrifying spectacle. The plaza you are standing in feels like a stage, and the temple is its dramatic backdrop. The enclosed nature of the citadel would have amplified sound, making every chant, every drumbeat, every cry echo with immense power. This was not a place for quiet personal contemplation. This was a theatre for public ritual, a place where the rulers of Teotihuacan performed the ceremonies that legitimized their power and maintained cosmic order. And as you gaze up at those bared fangs and goggle eyes, you get a chilling sense that the rituals performed here were not always peaceful celebrations. There is a weight to this place, a darkness that seems to emanate from the very stones. You are looking at an altar built for a powerful and perhaps bloodthirsty god, and beneath its stony gaze you sense that something horrific once unfolded a secret that the city has held for nearly 2,000 years. The darkness you feel emanating from the Temple of the Feathered Serpent isn't just your imagination, and it isn't just the result of the setting sun. It's the weight of the temple's deepest secret, a truth that lay buried and sealed for nearly 800 years. For centuries, the temple stood silently, a weathered, imposing structure half swallowed by time. Locals whispered legends, scholars made educated guesses, but no one could have possibly imagined what was buried beneath its layered stones. That is until archaeologists, in a series of groundbreaking excavations starting in the late 1980s, finally broke through. What they found wasn't just unexpected, it was profoundly unsettling. Hidden beneath the temple's foundations and within its core, they discovered a series of long, sealed chambers and burial pits. These were not the messy, chaotic results of war or plague. These were deliberate, systematic, ritualistic sacrifices executed with a chilling cold precision. The victims, numbering over 200 in total, were mostly young men, many between the ages of 15 and 25. They were buried in groups, their hands tied behind their backs. Some had been decapitated. Scattered among them were the unmistakable tools of ritual slaughter, sharp black obsidian knives, still as deadly as the day they were made. And this is where the discovery gets even darker. The arrangement of the bodies followed strict geometric and symbolic patterns. They weren't just thrown into a mass grave. They were deliberately placed in quadrants aligned with the cardinal directions, possibly to mirror the cosmos itself. Some groups were buried at the corners of the pyramid's foundation, others at the center of each of its four sides. Even the number of bodies in each burial seemed to hold significance. This wasn't just about death. It was about meaningful death, a meticulously choreographed offering to the gods. The victims themselves were clearly warriors. This is a mainstream historical fact, confirmed by the items buried with them. Many wore necklaces made not of jade or shell, but of human teeth, and in some cases maxillae human upper jawbones crafted into grim pendants. This is a quirky and macabre tidbit that points to a warrior culture where taking trophies from enemies was a sign of prowess. Offerings surrounded them elegantly carved serpents, jaguar skeletons, and thousands of exotic shells brought from the distant Gulf Coast. This was not a punishment for criminals. This was a gift to the gods, a high-status event involving the city's most formidable young men. Archaeologists and anthropologists still debate the exact identity of these victims. Were they captured enemy warriors taken in battle and sacrificed to consecrate the new temple and intimidate rivals? Or, as some evidence suggests, were they chosen from Teotihuacan's own elite ranks, honoured to give their lives for the spiritual preservation of their city? The fact that they were buried with such rich offerings suggests they were not lowly prisoners. They were dying as part of something transcendent. To the people of Teotihuacan, the very act of building a great temple may have required human sacrifice. It was as if every stone had to be consecrated with blood. Every new layer of the pyramid could only be raised after another offering of life had been made. The deeper the archaeologists dug, the more evidence of sacrifice they found, timed with the different stages of the temple's construction. This changes your entire perception of the building. It wasn't constructed on top of a grave. It was constructed to encase death. The blood didn't stain the stones by accident. The stones were meant to hold the blood. It was an essential ingredient in the architectural recipe. You imagine the scene, the great plaza filled with thousands of onlookers, the air thick with the smoke of copal incense and the rhythmic pounding of drums. One by one, the young warriors are led to the altar, their hands bound. There is no struggle. They have been chosen for this. They are fulfilling their sacred duty. The obsidian knife flashes. Blood flows, sanctifying the ground, feeding the gods, and ensuring that the cosmic engine of Teotihuacan continues to run. All of it was for the feathered serpent and for the rulers who claimed to speak for him. The temple was not just a house for a god, it was a hungry mouth, and its appetite was terrifying. The chilling discovery of mass sacrifice beneath the temple of the feathered serpent reveals a crucial truth about Teotihuacan. This was not just a city of artisans and merchants. It was a highly organized state that wielded cosmic ideology as a tool of political power. The entire city, you realize, was a machine, one designed to fuse cosmology warfare and fear into a system of absolute control over a population of more than 100,000 souls. And the ritual bloodletting you've just learned about was the cost of keeping that cosmic and political machine in balance. You look around the Citadel Plaza again, but this time you see it through a different lens. This wasn't just a public square. This was a stage, a meticulously designed theatre of power. From the upper tiers of the temple, the city's rulers, a group of anonymous priest-kings, could look down upon the masses gathered below. They controlled not just the spiritual narrative, but the very physical space in which it unfolded. The people looked up at the temple, up at the rulers, up at the sacrifices, and they understood their place in the grand order of things. The architecture itself was a form of propaganda. This was not chaos or senseless violence, this was statecraft. By orchestrating public executions on such a grand scale, surrounded by powerful cosmic symbols and death imagery, the ruling elite sent an unambiguous message to every citizen and every foreign visitor. The gods are with us, and we are not afraid to feed them. They alone held the power to communicate with these formidable deities. They alone could open the heavens or summon rain, protect the people, or destroy their enemies. Every sacrifice reinforced this narrative, turning abstract myth into a terrifyingly real political performance. The city's influence across Mesoamerica now makes more sense. Teotihuacan didn't necessarily need to conquer with massive armies, though they clearly had a formidable military. It could conquer with symbols, with ideology, with awe and terror. Visiting dignitaries from smaller city-states like those of the Maya would have been brought to this very plaza. They would have witnessed the rituals, seen the feathered serpents glaring from the temple walls, and heard the tales of the city's divine mandate. They would carry these stories home, speaking of the city where gods were born, where rulers commanded the cosmos, and where blood flowed to keep the world turning. It was a potent form of psychological warfare. There is a mainstream historical fact that supports this evidence from the Maya city of Tikal, shows a dramatic event in 378 AD, an arrival of emissaries from Teotihuacan. Shortly after, the local Maya king died and was replaced by a new ruler with direct ties to Teotihuacan. This wasn't a full-scale invasion. It was a political intervention likely backed by the threat of Teotihuacan's immense military and spiritual power. Their influence was not always subtle. A quirky and somewhat debated tidbit is the role of specific games in this political theatre. It's possible that a ritual ball game, a common feature in Mesoamerican cultures, was played in or near the citadel. In some cultures, the stakes of this game were life and death, with the losing team, or sometimes the winning team, as the greater honour being sacrificed. Imagine the political weight of a game where a visiting dignitary's team could be ceremonially executed, a stark reminder of who truly controlled the rules. Historians still argue about whether Teotihuacan was a true territorial empire or a hegemonic power that controlled a vast network through trade alliances and intimidation. But standing here in the shadow of a temple built on the bones of warriors, it's clear that their power was absolute. They had successfully merged the calendar, the stars, and the state into a single, terrifyingly effective system. The temple wasn't just a place of worship, it was an instrument of social control, a cosmic engine that ran on a fuel of faith, fear, and blood. And for centuries, this engine ran with ruthless efficiency, making Teotihuacan the undisputed master of its world. The city wasn't just the axis of the world, it was a sacred weapon. At its peak, Teotihuacan was the heartbeat of Mesoamerica, a city of fire and stone, of gods and blood, a metropolis that seemed destined to last forever. Its influence radiated for hundreds of miles, its art was revered, and its power was absolute. But around the year 550 AD, something changed, something broke, and the silence that followed was as chilling and profound as the temple's stone serpent heads. The fall of Teotihuacan was not a loud, glorious defeat in battle. It was a gradual decay followed by a sudden, violent collapse, and its end is as mysterious as its beginning. The signs of strain had begun to appear decades earlier. Evidence from ice cores and lake sediments in the region points to a long and severe period of drought that struck Mesoamerica in the 6th century. For a city so utterly dependent on agriculture to feed its massive population, this would have been catastrophic. Crop failures would have led to famine and social unrest. The very systems that had sustained this grand city, centralized power, religious dominance, the promise of cosmic order, began to crack under the pressure. The gods, it seemed, were no longer listening. The rains failed, and the faith of the people likely began to falter along with them. And then came the fire. Archaeologists have uncovered a widespread burn layer across the city, but it's a very specific kind of burn layer. The destruction was not random. The city's grandest temples along the Avenue of the Dead, the elite palace compounds, and the administrative buildings were systematically looted and burned. The temple of the feathered serpent itself was ransacked. Its sculptures were smashed and defaced, its ritual spaces desecrated. But what's truly strange is that the residential areas of the common people, the sprawling apartment compounds where the farmers and artisans lived, were mostly left untouched. This is the key piece of evidence, a mainstream historical fact that has reshaped our understanding of the city's demise. This was not an external invasion by a rival power. An invading army would have burned the city indiscriminately. This was an internal uprising, a rebellion. The very people who once watched the sacrifices in awe and terror may have finally risen up against their priest kings. It was a targeted, deliberate act of destruction aimed at the symbols of the ruling class and their state religion. After centuries of absolute control, the system imploded. The people, starving and disillusioned, turned on their leaders and torched the ideological heart of the city. There's a quirky and poignant tidbit that adds another layer to this theory. In the final years before the collapse, artistic depictions of military figures and certain deities became more prominent, while symbols of abundance and fertility became scarcer. Some historians interpret this as a sign of a state in crisis, a ruling class desperately trying to reinforce its authority through military imagery as its religious and economic power waned. They were doubling down on fear, but it wasn't enough. After the Great Fire of 550 AD, Teotihuacan wasn't completely abandoned overnight, but it lost its soul. The central authority vanished. The great rituals stopped. The trade networks that had been the lifeblood of its economy collapsed. The population dwindled, scattering to smaller settlements throughout the valley. The city that had been the center of the Mesoamerican world for half a millennium fell silent. The ruling elite, the priest kings who once commanded the cosmos, simply disappeared from the historical record. And yet the mystery only deepened, because while the city faded, its memory endured, transformed into legend. Centuries later, sometime in the 1300s, a new people arrived in the Valley of Mexico. A nomadic tribe from the north, they would come to be known as the Aztecs. When they stumbled upon the colossal ruins of this abandoned city, they were awestruck. They could not believe that mere mortals could have built such a place. They believed it had been constructed by giants or by the gods themselves at the beginning of time. They gave it the name we use today, Teotihuacan, the Nahuatl word for the place where the gods were born. The Aztecs revered the city as sacred ground, a place of pilgrimage. They built their own myths around its pyramids, incorporating it into their own cosmology. They saw the temple of the feathered serpent and adopted the deity into their own pantheon as Quetzalcoatl. But the irony is staggering. The most powerful city of its time, a civilization built on cosmic order, and the power of its rituals vanished without leaving a written word, without a final record of its own story. It left behind only stone and questions. The gods, it seemed, had gone quiet, and their silent, empty city now belonged to the myths of another people. We leave the silent, ghostly avenues of Teotihuacan behind the memory of its stone serpents and mysterious collapse lingering in the quiet air. Our journey now takes another turn, moving away from specific places and into a more universal, more fundamental realm of human experience. We are travelling far back to a time before cities, before writing, even before the birth of complex language itself. We are searching for a sound, a pulse, a rhythm. Before we spoke in words, we spoke in rhythm. And in that primal beat we find the origin of humanity's first and most enduring instrument. Tens of thousands of years ago, in the dim prehistory of our species, early humans began to create something that could only be described as sound with intention. It wasn't speech, not yet. It wasn't melody. It was pure patterned rhythm. Imagine a hand slapping against a taut, hollow piece of bark, a heavy stick tapping against a resonant, weathered stone, a foot stomping the hard-packed earth in a steady, repeating beat. Somewhere in that ancient repetition, something magical and transformative emerged, the first drum beat. It wasn't called music. It wasn't called anything, but it felt like something. It felt like communication. It felt like shared movement. It felt like emotion taking its first physical form. Anthropologists have uncovered evidence of primitive percussion instruments dating back to the Paleolithic era over 30,000 years ago. These weren't sophisticated instruments, of course. They were likely made from readily available natural materials, hollowed out tree trunks, dried gourds, or animal hides, stretched tautly over a simple frame of wood or bone. These materials are organic and perishable, so direct evidence is incredibly rare. A quirky tidbit is that some of the earliest potential evidence comes not from the instruments themselves, but from the wear patterns on artifacts. For example, mammoth bones found at sites in Ukraine dating back some 15,000 years show signs of being repeatedly struck, suggesting they may have been used as a form of percussive instrument or lithophone. But these rudimentary drums were not toys or the product of idle distraction. They served very real, very crucial purposes in the life of a hunter-gatherer tribe. They were tools of communication. Imagine a small group of hunters scattered across a dense forest. A specific sequence of beats from a distant drum could signal that prey has been spotted, that danger is approaching, or that it's time to return to camp. It was a primitive Morse code, a language of pure sound that could travel further and more clearly than a human shout. They were also tools of connection. Drumming was almost certainly a communal activity. You can picture it a group gathered around a crackling fire under a vast, star-filled sky. One person starts a beat, another joins in, then another. The rhythm builds syncs and locks in. The shared pulse unites them, synchronizing not just their movements, but perhaps even their heartbeats and brainwaves. In these moments, they were not just a collection of individuals, they were a tribe, a single entity moving to one rhythm. These ancient beats became a language of emotion capable of expressing joy, grief warning, or hope, all without a single syllable. Historians and ethnomusicologists widely agree that rhythm likely predates melody and harmony in human musical development. This is a mainstream historical fact, supported by the ubiquity of percussive instruments in virtually every ancient culture found across the globe. Before the first flutes were carved from bone, before the first strings were stretched on a hunting bow, the drum was already alive. It was anchoring human communities in time, giving shape to their rituals and forging a sense of collective identity. No matter where on Earth people lived, from the savannas of Africa to the frozen tundra of the Arctic, they found something to strike, something to beat, something to mark the moment. Because even when we had no words, we had rhythm, and that rhythm in the beginning was everything. As early human societies slowly evolved from nomadic bands into settled tribes and early civilizations, the drum was not just an instrument, it became a sacred voice, a direct line to the unseen world. Every culture, every tribe, every corner of the earth developed its own unique rhythms, its own distinct percussive instruments. But the purpose behind them was nearly universal: to commune with the spirits, to honor the ancestors, and to connect with the very heartbeat of the natural world. In Africa, the continent where humanity and some of the world's earliest drums emerged, rhythm was, and still is, deeply intertwined with every aspect of life, death, and ancestry. Take the djembe, a goblet-shaped drum from West Africa, carved from a single log and topped with a goatskin head. It is believed to contain three distinct spirits: the spirit of the tree from which it was carved, the spirit of the animal, whose skin gives it its voice, and the spirit of the craftsman who brought it to life. When played in a ceremonial circle, the djembe doesn't just accompany the ritual, it is the ritual. Its complex rhythms are a form of storytelling, a living library of a people's history and beliefs. Then there were the famous talking drums. These hourglass-shaped drums held under the arm could produce a wide range of pitches by squeezing the ropes that held the drumhead taut. A master drummer could mimic the tones and rhythms of human speech so accurately that they could send complex messages across miles of dense jungle, relaying news of births, deaths, and approaching visitors from one village to the next. Long before the telephone or telegraph, humans were already drumming their messages through the landscape. This is a mainstream historical fact that highlights the drum's role as a sophisticated communication device. Across the oceans in the Americas, Native American tribes treated the drum as a living entity. For many, it represented the heartbeat of Mother Earth herself. The large powwow drum, played communally by a circle of men, is both a musical and spiritual engine. Its steady, powerful beat is the pulse that aligns the human world with the natural world and the spirit world. It is used in ceremonies to honor the ancestors, to summon healing energy, or to guide the souls of the departed on their journey. To strike the drum is to offer a prayer. To sing with it is to give that prayer a voice. In the vast landscapes of Australia, the Aboriginal people have used percussion for tens of thousands of years as part of the sacred dream time, their mythic era of creation. While they didn't develop hide-covered drums, their use of clapsticks, two simple pieces of wood struck together, and percussive stomping created intricate rhythms that accompanied their songs and ceremonies, mapping out the journeys of ancestral spirits across the land. A quirky tidbit is that the sound of the didgeridoo, often thought of as a purely melodic instrument, is also deeply rhythmic, with the player using circular breathing to create a continuous hypnotic drone that serves as a percussive foundation. Even in the harsh frozen landscapes of the Arctic, the Inuit shamans used large, single-headed frame drums known as kilot. In the long, dark winters, the shaman would strike the drum in a steady, repetitive rhythm to enter a trance state, seeking visions, communicating with animal spirits, or travelling to the underworld to heal the sick. These weren't performances for an audience. These were acts of spiritual survival, a way to maintain balance in a world of extreme challenges. Historians and anthropologists still debate the precise timeline of the drum's global spread. Was it an idea that diffused from a single origin, or did it emerge independently in different cultures? But what is undeniable is its universal sacredness. In these early societies, drumming was not entertainment. It was a fundamental act of remembering, of storytelling, of healing, and of belonging. It was always communal, bringing people together in sacred circles, synchronizing their hearts and their intentions. It didn't matter where on earth you stood. If you heard a drum in the distance, you knew something significant, something sacred was happening, something that words alone could never hope to express. From the heart of sacred circles to the blood-soaked soil of ancient battlefields, the drum has always spoken. Sometimes it whispers with comfort, and sometimes it thunders with command. As human societies evolved from tribes into larger kingdoms and empires, the drum's role transformed. It became a tool of order, an instrument of domination, and a terrifying weapon of fear. The earliest armies didn't march to the sound of trumpets alone. They marched to the relentless, disciplined beat of the drum. Imagine you are a soldier in ancient China during the time of the warring states. You stand in a vast formation, thousands of men strong. The air is tense, the enemy is in sight. You can't hear the voice of your general, who is miles away. How do you know when to advance, when to hold, when to retreat? You listen for the drums. Massive war, drums some so large they had to be carried on carts, were used to coordinate troop movements across vast, chaotic terrains. A single resonant boom could signal the beginning of a charge. A rapid rolling rhythm might signal a flanking maneuver. A sudden silence could mean, hold your position. These drums weren't just loud, they were strategic. Each rhythm was a specific command, and every trained soldier knew how to listen and react instantly, even through the deafening chaos of battle. In Mesopotamia, the great temple drums were used to announce the decrees of rulers and summon the public for ceremonies. But in times of conflict, these same drums were brought to the city walls. Their deep, relentless thunder would echo through the streets and out across the plains, a terrifying announcement of the city's power and resolve. It wasn't just percussion, it was psychological warfare designed to break the morale of a besieging enemy before the first arrow was even fired. When the Roman legions marched, they were famous for their discipline and order, often marked by the blare of horns like the cornu and the tuba. While they didn't use drums as primary battlefield communication in the way the Chinese did, they did have the tympanum, a large frame drum. It was more commonly used in processions, triumphs, and in the wild, ecstatic rituals of cults like that of the goddess Cybele. Though not a mainstream military instrument, it carried symbolic power, a sound that represented the empire's rhythm, its discipline, and its inexorable march across the known world. But perhaps no army in history wielded drums as a weapon of fear quite like the Ottoman Empire. Their elite Janissary corps were preceded into battle by the Meteran, the world's first known dedicated military bands. These were not small fife and drum corps. This was an overwhelming storm of sound, a cacophony of drum cymbals and horns designed to shock and awe. The relentless booming pound of the Kurs giant kettle drums carried on horseback or camels, and the Darvel large double-headed bass drums struck pure terror into the hearts of their European adversaries. There are numerous historical accounts from Christian soldiers describing how they were frozen in panic before even seeing the Ottoman army paralysed by the sheer volume and alien, intimidating rhythms. A quirky tidbit is that this Turkish music so terrified Europeans that it later became a fashionable, exotic influence in classical music, with composers like Mozart and Beethoven, incorporating its crashing cymbals and thundering bass drum into their own works. Drums also enforced power off the battlefield. In royal courts across Asia, Africa and Europe, ensembles of drummers would announce the arrival of the monarch, mark the solemnity of a coronation, and underscore the gravity of political rituals. To be allowed to beat a drum was often a right granted by the king himself. It was a declaration: power is present. Historians still debate the degree to which these drums were seen as a magical extension of the ruler's authority versus a purely practical tool. But for the common person, the effect was the same. The sound of the drum meant order, it meant power, and it meant you had better pay attention. Whether it signalled divine right military discipline or raw, unadulterated fear, the drum has always carried the same essential message: this is who rules, this is who marches, and this is the rhythm of power. As civilizations branched out across continents, separated by vast oceans and mountain ranges, so too did their rhythms. The drum, a universal human invention, began to evolve along two distinct philosophical paths. In the East, in the ancient cultures of India, Japan and Indonesia, the drum became a sophisticated tool of precision spirituality and high art. In the West, particularly in Europe, it largely remained a functional instrument of military power and folk tradition, only slowly making its way into the world of formal music. Two worlds, two divergent paths, but one shared beating heart. Let's travel first to India, where the drum became a sacred instrument of divine language. Here you encounter the tabla, a pair of small hand drums capable of producing an astonishing range of tones. The smaller wooden drum, the dayan, provides crisp, high-pitched tones, while the larger metal drum, the bayan, creates deep, resonant bass notes that can be modulated with the heel of the hand. The tabla is used in classical Indian music and devotional performances, but it is far more than mere accompaniment. It is a conversation. A quirky and fascinating tidbit is that each stroke or bowl has a name, a syllabic identity that can be spoken aloud. A master tabla player doesn't just play rhythms, they recite rhythmic poetry. A performance is a dazzling display of mathematical complexity and fluid grace, a conversation between the drummer, the melodic instrumentalist, and the audience. The training takes decades, and the tabla player is not just a musician, they are a linguist of rhythm. Now we move to Japan, where the taiko drum emerged as a ceremonial giant. The word taiko simply means big drum, and some of these instruments are enormous, carved from a single massive tree trunk. Originally used in Shinto rituals to call down the gods in theatrical performances, like kabuki, and on the battlefield to intimidate enemies, taiko drumming requires not just technical skill, but immense physical discipline. You watch a group of taiko drummers, and you see that their movements are as important as the sound they create. Their stances are low and grounded like martial artists. Their arm movements are powerful and precise. In festivals, the booming resonant sound of the taiko echoes through mountain valleys, a sound believed to drive away evil spirits and purify the land. It's a full-body art form, a fusion of music, dance and meditation. Meanwhile, in Indonesia you hear the hypnotic interlocking rhythms of the gamelan orchestra. Here the kendang drum leads the ensemble, setting the tempo and guiding the other musicians and dancers in sacred temple ceremonies. The rhythms are layered, cyclical and celestial, a sonic reflection of cosmic harmony and balance. It is a communal music where no single instrument is the star, but all are part of a shimmering, intricate whole. Now, we cross the world to medieval and Renaissance Europe. Here the drum has a very different story. It was largely a utilitarian instrument. The tabor, a small snare drum, was played with a pipe to provide music for folk dancing. In the military field, drummers beat out cadences for marching soldiers, signalling commands alongside fifes. It was a sound of the common people of the military barracks of the village green. It wasn't until the Renaissance and Baroque eras that drums, primarily the kettle drums or timpani, began to enter the world of formal orchestral music. Even then, they were kept in the background, used to add a thunderous flourish to royal fanfares, or a solemn echo in grand cathedrals. It was a sound of power, but not yet of art. Historians still debate why this divergence occurred. Was it the influence of different religious philosophies with the more mystical traditions of the East, embracing rhythm's transcendental power? while the more structured church music of the West favoured vocal harmony? Or was it simply the result of different social structures? In this divergence, you see two philosophies. The East saw rhythm as both art and spirit, something tied to breath chant and meditation. The West saw it primarily as structure and force, a tool to rally to march and to measure. But both understood the drum's core power to shape time, to dictate pace, and to connect human beings in ways that transcend spoken language. East or West, sacred or strategic, the drum remained central, always listening, always speaking. From mountaintop temples in Japan to jungle clearings in West Africa, from desert fires in Australia to candlelit cathedrals in Europe, the drum has always found a home in the space where the human meets the divine. Long before the rise of organized religion as we know it today, rhythm was already a sacred language. It was a way to pray when you had no words, a way to summon spirits, a way to heal the sick, and a way to transcend the boundaries of the self. In many African traditional religions, drums are not just instruments. They are spiritual beings, conduits for divine energy. In the Yoruba traditions of Nigeria, for example, the sacred bata drums are used to communicate directly with the orishas, the pantheon of gods and ancestral spirits. These hourglass-shaped drums, played in a set of 3, are said to have their own anya, or sacred essence. Drummers are not just performers, they are initiates, priests, who have learned the specific complex rhythms that call forth each orisha. The rhythms are encoded prayers, sonic invitations for the gods to descend from the heavens and possess the bodies of the dancers, to dance among the living. Each rhythmic pattern has a sacred purpose. Each beat has a divine direction. It is a living, breathing theology of sound. In Hinduism, one of the world's oldest living religions, the drum appears even in the hands of the gods themselves. The deity Shiva, in his form as Nataraja, the lord of the dance, performs the cosmic dance of creation and destruction. In one of his hands he holds a small hourglass-shaped drum called a damaru. Its beat is said to represent the very pulse of the universe, the primal sound from which all creation emerged. From silence came sound, from void came form. The drum in this context is the divine heartbeat, the rhythm that sets the cosmos in motion. This is a mainstream historical fact, central to Hindu iconography and philosophy. In Buddhism, particularly in traditions like Zen and Tibetan Buddhism, the drum is used in a very different but equally sacred way. The large temple drum, or uchiwadaiko, is used to signal times for meditation and to accompany monastic chants. Its slow, deep resonant strikes are not meant to excite, but to focus. The rhythm guides the breath and centers the mind, acting as a metronome for the soul. A quirky tidbit is that in some Zen monasteries, the role of the timekeeping drummer, or jikijitsu, is a position of great responsibility, as their rhythm dictates the pace and energy of the entire monastic community's practice. It's not loud or aggressive, it simply reminds the practitioner to return again and again to the quiet anchor of the present moment. Across the Americas, indigenous tribes have used drums in their most sacred ceremonies for millennia. In a sweat lodge ceremony, the constant steady beat of a hand drum can represent the heartbeat of Mother Earth, helping participants enter a meditative or trance-like state to seek visions or purification. In healing ceremonies, a shaman might use a drum to journey into the spirit world to find and retrieve a lost part of a patient's soul. In these sacred spaces, the drum doesn't just accompany the prayer, it is the prayer. Its voice is a bridge between the physical and the spiritual. Even within Christianity, a faith that for centuries was often suspicious of strong body-moving rhythms, the drum eventually found a powerful sacred role. In the gospel traditions, particularly within African American churches, drums became a central means of praise and power. The driving beat of the drum kit, combined with the Hammond organ and soaring vocals, creates a space of ecstatic devotion, a joyful noise unto the Lord. The rhythm is a reminder of struggle, of hope, of resilience, and of the divine pulse that beats within every life. Historians still debate the extent to which these powerful rhythms are a direct continuation of African spiritual traditions, but their sacred power is undeniable. No matter the faith, the ritual, or the god being invoked, the drum has been there not as mere decoration, but as a vessel for energy, for intention, and for the great mysteries we cannot speak. because when words fail, in worship rhythm remains, and the divine, it seems, always listens. For thousands of years, drums were largely solitary instruments. One body, one sound, one purpose. A taiko drummer in Japan, a djembe player in Mali, a timpanist in a European orchestra, each was a master of a single percussive voice. But in the heart of the bustling, noisy, and inventive industrial age, something revolutionary began to happen. In the crowded orchestra pits of vaudeville theatres and the lively dance halls of New Orleans, percussion was being reimagined. By the early 20th century, multiple drums were no longer scattered across a stage, played by several people. They were being united, consolidated, and brought under the control of a single performer, forming something entirely new and profoundly modern: the drum kit. The drum kit was born not out of an artistic vision, but out of pure practical necessity. In the late 1800s, popular music bands and theatre orchestras required several percussionists to cover all the rhythmic parts. One person on the bass drum for the downbeats, another on the snare drum for the backbeats and rolls, and a third playing cymbals and other sound effects like woodblocks and cowbells. But space in orchestra pits was tight, and theatre budgets were even tighter. Hiring 3 or 4 percussionists was an expense many venues wanted to cut. So resourceful drummers began to experiment, trying to play more than one instrument at a time. This was known as double drumming. A drummer might place a snare drum on a chair rig up a way to strike a cymbal with a stick attached to their snare, and use their feet to play the bass drum. It was clumsy, but it was a start. The true breakthrough came with a simple but ingenious invention: the bass drum pedal. While early clunky versions existed, the first truly practical and mass-produced bass drum pedal was patented in 1909 by William F. Ludwig. This was the game changer. A drummer could now sit down and strike a massive bass drum with one foot, leaving both hands free to play the snare drum and other instruments. The idea caught fire. This is the mainstream historical fact that marks the birth of the modern drum set. Over the next few decades, the setup evolved rapidly. Drummers and inventors added a stand for the snare drum, a lowboy pedal that brought 2 cymbals together near the floor, which would soon rise up to become the hi-hat and small tunable drums called tom-toms, inspired by Chinese drums, which were mounted on the bass drum. A quirky tidbit is that the earliest cymbals were often just cheap tinny plates, and the snare drum sound was sometimes achieved by simply placing a wallet on a regular drumhead to muffle it. The drum kit was a Frankenstein's monster of rhythm cobbled together from different traditions and pure ingenuity. And then came jazz. In the smoky clubs and underground dance halls of New Orleans and Chicago, the drum kit didn't just find a home, it exploded into life. Early jazz drummers like Baby Dodds didn't just keep a steady beat, they played the kit as a cohesive, expressive voice. They created a conversation between the bass drum, the snare, the cymbals, and the woodblocks using syncopation swing and incredible sensitivity. The drum kit was no longer just a timekeeping device. It was an instrument capable of melody, texture, and emotion. The next generation of jazz legends, the big band-era superstars like Gene Krupa and Buddy Rich, turned the drum set into a lead instrument. With their dazzling theatrical solos, they proved that a drummer could be the star of the show. The rhythm was no longer just a foundation, it was storytelling. As jazz evolved into rock and roll, the drum kit grew louder, heavier, and more powerful. The 1960s and 70s saw kits expand, with multiple tom-toms, splash cymbals, and double bass drum pedals. Drummers like John Bonham of Led Zeppelin, Neil Peart of Rush, and Keith Moon of The Who pushed the physical and creative limits of the instrument. The drummer wasn't in the background anymore. He or she was the engine of the band, the driving force of modern music. Today, the drum kit is a global staple, but its origins are humble, born from the simple need to make more noise with fewer people. It's a symbol of modern rhythm, a fusion of centuries of tradition and pure, unadulterated innovation, where one drummer can finally speak with 10 voices at once. As the 20th century roared to a close, the sound of the drum began to change once again. Not in its fundamental rhythm, but in its very texture and origin. The physical gave way to the programmable. The sweaty palms, the resonant wooden shells, the calloused fingertips all began to share space with electrical circuits, rubber pads, and lines of code. The age of the digital drum had arrived, and with it a new pulse that would redefine the sound of modern music. It began quietly in the 1970s with primitive, bulky drum machines. Early devices like the Rhythmicon and the Roland CR78 used analog circuits to generate simple, pre-programmed electronic beats. They were often used as accompaniment for organ players in lounges or as simple rhythm tracks for solo performers. At first they sounded robotic thin and even a bit awkward. They couldn't replicate the swing, the feel, the subtle imperfections of a human drummer. But musicians and producers saw something else in them: perfect consistency, absolute control, and the potential for a whole new sonic palette. Then, in 1980, a revolution arrived in a cream-coloured box. Roland released the TR-808 Rhythm Composer. This drum machine was a commercial failure, at first dismissed by many as sounding too unrealistic. Its sounds were not samples of real drums. They were generated by analog synthesis. Its kick drum was a deep, booming sine wave with a long decay. Its snare was a sharp burst of white noise. Its cowbell sounded like, well, nothing on earth. But a quirky and genre-defining tidbit is that its unrealistic sounds were precisely what made it a legend. As these cheap second-hand units fell into the hands of pioneering hip-hop and electronic artists in the early 80s, they became the foundation for entire genres. The deep boom of the 808 kick became the heartbeat of hip-hop techno-electro, and decades later, trap music. The 808 wasn't just a tool, it was an instrument in its own right, its synthetic pulse now instantly recognizable across the globe. As digital audio technology progressed, so did the tools. Electronic drum kits, like the iconic Simmons pads of the 80s and the later Roland V drums, allowed drummers to play with sticks on pressure-sensitive pads while triggering thousands of different sampled or synthesized tones. This is a mainstream historical fact that changed the lives of drummers everywhere. Artists could now rehearse silently with headphones, record perfectly clean drum tracks without a single microphone, and switch from a heavy rock kit to a jazz brush kit to a full orchestral percussion section with the press of a button. And with the rise of personal computers came the Digital Audio Workstation, or DAW. Software like Ableton Live, FL Studio and Logic Pro put the power of a professional recording studio into a laptop. Now anyone could become a rhythm programmer. You could build incredibly complex rhythms by clicking a mouse layering kicks, snares, hi-hats and sub-bass into vast sonic architectures. The art of finger drumming on MIDI pads like the Akai MPC became a virtuosic skill in its own right, a new way of playing the drums that was both tactile and digital. Some traditionalists feared this seismic shift. They worried that the rise of the machine would mean the death of real drumming, a replacement of human feel with cold, quantized precision. But that's not what happened. Instead, a hybridity emerged. Acoustic drummers began integrating electronic pads and triggers into their traditional kits. Producers started layering the organic feel of a live play drum loop with the powerful, clean punch of a programmed beat. The organic and the synthetic found a groove together. Digital drums didn't erase the past, they reimagined it. And today, you live in a world where a single person in a bedroom can build rhythms that once would have required entire orchestras, where ancient grooves from Africa, Asia and the Americas can be sampled, twisted, and given new life on neon-lit dance floors. The tools have changed dramatically, but the fundamental human purpose remains the same: to move bodies to shape time and to make the silence speak. The beat, whether born of wood or of code, goes on. The digital pulse of a drum machine fades, and the neon lights of a modern club dissolve into the soft, flickering gaslight of a bygone era. Our journey takes its final turn tonight, leaving behind the universal story of rhythm to focus on a single iconic sliver of land. We are travelling back to the early 19th century to an island known to its original Lenape inhabitants as Mannahatta, the land of many hills. But the world would soon know it by a different name, Manhattan, and before it became a breathtaking forest of glass and steel, it was an island of shadows not cast by towering skyscrapers, but by church steeples, ship masts and sloping rooftops. Imagine yourself in New York City circa 1820. The skyline as you know it simply doesn't exist. The city is a dense, chaotic and low-slung cluster of activity clinging stubbornly to the southern tip of the island. It's a city you can smell before you see it, a mixture of coal smoke, horse manure, salty sea air, and the thousand scents of commerce and humanity packed into a small space. The streets are a maze of dirt-packed roads and cobblestone lanes, navigated by clattering horse-drawn carts and bustling pedestrians. The architecture is a jumble of brick townhouses, timber-framed shops and stone churches all huddled together. Buildings here rarely climb beyond 5 or 6 stories. It's not because ambition was lacking. New York was already a city of immense energy and burgeoning wealth. The limitation was a fundamental law of physics. To build high with traditional materials like stone and brick was to build heavy. This is a mainstream historical fact of early construction. The taller the building, the more weight it carried, and that weight had to be supported by its own walls. This meant that the walls on the ground floor had to be incredibly thick sometimes, several feet, just to support the levels above. This left very little usable space inside and required enormous costly foundations. It simply didn't make financial or practical sense to build much higher, so the city grew horizontally instead of vertically. It was spreading northward, following a revolutionary grid plan that had been laid out in 1811. This commissioner's plan was one of the boldest urban blueprints of its time, carving the wild, hilly landscape of the island into a predictable pattern of streets and avenues. But beneath that grid, under the layers of soil and rock, Manhattan held a secret weapon, a geological gift that would one day make its vertical dreams possible. Bedrock. A deep, dense and incredibly stable spine of granite and schist ran beneath the island. This ancient rock, forged millions of years ago, would one day be able to support the weight of some of the tallest and heaviest structures in human history. But for now, it lay quiet, untouched, its potential unrealized. Life in early Manhattan was noisy, but fundamentally grounded. Commerce bustled in the harbour, the forest of ship masts along the eastern Hudson rivers, forming its own temporary wooden skyline. The economy was booming, immigration was beginning to surge, and the island swelled with a restless, forward-looking energy. Yet still the city hugged the ground. The sky remained open, vast, and largely untouched. The only real vertical statements in the city were the spires of its churches. Trinity Church, located at the intersection of Wall Street and Broadway, was the most prominent. Its spire, in its various incarnations, was often the tallest structure in the city, a symbol of faith and community looming over the world of finance. A quirky tidbit: in the 18th century, a law was passed requiring that all new buildings taller than 2 stories be made of brick or stone to prevent the spread of fire, a constant terror in the tightly packed city. This law inadvertently helped create the brownstone aesthetic that would later define so many of New York's neighborhoods. What no one standing on these muddy streets in 1820 could have known was that the future of their skyline wouldn't be shaped by stone, brick, or wood. It would be forged from iron, steel, and pure, audacious vision. It wouldn't be limited by the thickness of its walls or the stamina of its stair climbers. It would rise far, far above the ground. Manhattan wasn't yet a city of towers, but the stage was being set. The island was ready. The bedrock was waiting. And soon the skyline would begin to stretch. For centuries, gravity was the undisputed chief architect in Manhattan. It kept buildings, short cities flat, and human ambition firmly tethered to the earth. Climbing more than 5 or 6 flights of stairs was a chore no one wanted, making the top floors of any building the least desirable and cheapest real estate. But in the middle of the 19th century, 2 revolutionary breakthroughs, one lifting people, the other, lifting buildings, would shatter gravity's reign and crack the skyline wide open. The first breakthrough arrived in 1852, and it was a masterpiece of engineering and showmanship. An inventor from Vermont named Elisha Otis unveiled his new safety elevator at the New York Crystal Palace, a grand exhibition hall. In a dramatic demonstration that would become legendary, Otis stood on an open elevator platform, hoisted high above a nervous crowd. He then ordered the single supporting rope to be cut with an axe. The crowd gasped, expecting the platform and Otis to plummet to the ground, but it didn't. After dropping only a few inches, a hidden safety mechanism, a spring-loaded pole, snapped into place, locking the lift securely in its tracks. "All safe, gentlemen," Otis proclaimed to the stunned audience. With that single breathtaking moment, Elisha Otis didn't just sell an invention. he sold the idea of vertical living. This is a mainstream historical fact that cannot be overstated. Until then, elevators or hoists were considered dangerous and used only for freight. No one trusted them with human life. By proving his elevator was safe, Otis transformed the economics of architecture. Suddenly, the top floors of buildings were no longer the cheap, undesirable walk-ups. They became premium space offering better light, cleaner air, stunning views, and a new kind of status. The vertical city suddenly made perfect economic sense. But being able to move people upwards safely was only half the battle. Buildings themselves were still constrained by their own weight. They still relied on thick, load-bearing masonry walls, which grew more massive and cumbersome the higher they went. A 10-story building would need walls so thick at its base that its ground floor interior would be a dark, cramped warren of small rooms. This is where innovation number 2 arrived: the steel skeleton. In the 1880s and 90s, pioneering architects and engineers in Chicago and New York began to experiment with a new construction method. Instead of relying on the walls to support the building, they created a rigid internal frame, a skeleton made of iron and later steel beams. This metal frame would carry the entire weight of the building, the floors, the roof, everything. This freed the exterior walls from their structural burden. They no longer had to be thick, heavy anchors. They could be thin, curtain walls, essentially just weatherproof skins made of brick terracotta or glass hung from the steel frame. A quirky tidbit is that this method was so revolutionary that some early critics worried these new skyscrapers would be blown over by the wind, not understanding that the internal frame provided all the necessary strength and rigidity. This steel frame construction gave architects an entirely new and intoxicating freedom. They could now build as high as the frame could handle and the elevator could reach. Windows could be larger, letting in more light. Interior spaces could be more open and flexible. Suddenly, height was no longer a liability. It was a strategy. The technology had arrived, the materials were available, and Manhattan, with its solid bedrock foundation, its booming economy, and its fiercely competitive spirit, was the perfect canvas. The island's tight geography and highland values naturally encouraged vertical thinking. Its status as the financial and media capital of the world meant that every major bank, newspaper and corporation wanted their name etched visibly into the clouds. The elevator made the sky accessible. The steel skeleton made the sky buildable. Together, they didn't just change architecture. They redefined what a city could be. The race would now begin. Not outward, but upward. Manhattan was ready to soar. By the late 19th century, New York City was no longer content to sprawl. It wanted to soar. The ground on the southern tip of Manhattan was full. The streets were packed with people and commerce, and the only direction left to build was up. With the twin innovations of the steel frame skeleton and the safety elevator now firmly established, Manhattan became a proving ground for this new form of architecture. The skyline, once dominated by a handful of church spires, transformed into a battlefield for corporate ambition. The first shots in this race to the clouds were fired in a neighborhood that became known as Newspaper Row, along Park Row, across from City Hall. Here, the city's powerful and fiercely competitive newspaper moguls battled for dominance not just in circulation, but in altitude. This is a mainstream historical fact. A taller headquarters was a physical manifestation of a paper's influence and success. In 1890, Joseph Pulitzer's New York World building was completed. At 20 stories and 309 feet to the top of its dome, it became the tallest office building in the world, and the first to surpass the spire of Trinity Church. It was a golden dome declaration that the press was a new power in the city. But its reign was brief. Other towers quickly rose to challenge it. Not to be outdone, the Park Row building, located just down the street, claimed the title in 1899. Standing at 391 feet with 30 stories, it was a behemoth of its time. Each new tower was a public spectacle and a declaration of prowess. To build higher was to announce to the world, we are the future. Soon this architectural arms race spread beyond Newspaper Row. The skyline began to sprout with steel giants financed by titans of industry and finance. The Singer Building, completed in 1908, was a stunning example. Designed as the headquarters for the sewing machine company, It was a slender, elegant tower of red brick and pale stone that stood at 612 feet. It became the tallest building in the world and held the title for a little over a year. A quirky and rather sad tidbit is that the Singer Building, despite being an architectural marvel of its time, was demolished in 1968 to make way for a larger, more modern office block, becoming the tallest building ever to be peacefully demolished at the time. Its fate is a stark reminder of New York's relentless cycle of destruction and reinvention. But even the Singer Building's height was soon eclipsed. In 1913, the Woolworth Building took the crown and would hold it for 17 years. Designed by architect Cass Gilbert and financed entirely in cash by retail magnate Frank W. Woolworth, it was a masterpiece of neo-Gothic design that soared 792 feet into the air. With its intricate terracotta ornamentation-soaring lobby and spire-like crown, it was immediately dubbed the Cathedral of Commerce. The Woolworth wasn't just tall, it was majestic, an architectural sermon about the rise of American capitalism as a modern, almost spiritual power. Reverend S. Parks Cadman famously gave it this nickname, which perfectly captured its blend of commercial ambition and sacred aesthetics. This was more than just architectural competition, it was branding warfare. Corporations and institutions vied for the tallest, most distinctive buildings, towers that would etch their names into the sky and into the public consciousness. Every new height record was a front-page headline. Every new silhouette became an instant symbol of the city. The skyscraper became the ultimate billboard, permanent, imposing, and impossible to ignore. And beneath it all, the rhythm of progress beat relentlessly. Steam shovels gouged foundations deep into the Manhattan schist. Riveters working in deafeningly loud gangs hammered red-hot steel rivets into place, their percussive sounds echoing through the city day and night. And most iconic of all were the ironworkers, many of them Mohawk from Canada, who balanced nonchalantly on narrow beams hundreds of feet in the air, with no safety harnesses, only grit, skill, and an astonishing lack of fear. They were the unsung heroes building this new vertical world. The skyline was no longer a theoretical possibility. It was real, it was rising, and it was reaching for heights that would have been unimaginable just a generation before. As the 1920s roared through Manhattan, bringing with them the sounds of jazz, the clinking of speakeasy glasses, and an unprecedented economic boom, the skyline began to dance. It wasn't just about climbing higher anymore. It was about doing so with style, with flair, with a kind of theatrical elegance. This was the era of Art Deco, a design movement that celebrated the machine age, geometric forms, and opulent decoration. The Jazz Age poured its energy, its glamour, and its forward-looking optimism into steel and stone, and New York's new skyscrapers became shimmering icons of movement, light, and boundless ambition. The most dazzling of them all was the Chrysler Building. Completed in 1930, it was a project driven by the personal ambition of automobile magnate Walter P. Chrysler. He wanted a monument not just to his company, but to the modern age itself. Designed by architect William Van Allen, the tower wasn't just a building, it was a symphony of design. It rose 1,046 feet briefly, but gloriously becoming the tallest building in the world. Its design was a celebration of the automobile, with ornamental eagles modelled after Chrysler hood ornaments, jutting from its corners like futuristic guardians. The brickwork patterns and corner decorations on higher floors mimicked wheels and hubcaps. But its true genius was its crown. The famous terraced spire made of stainless steel was designed to shimmer in the sun like a radiant crown. A mainstream historical fact of its construction is the stuff of legend the spire was built in secret inside the building's fire shaft. Then, in a stunning feat of engineering and showmanship, it was hoisted into place in a mere 90 minutes, snatching the title of world's tallest from a rival project, 40 Wall Street, whose architects thought they had secured the record. With its graceful curves, its triangular windows, and its machine-age detailing, the Chrysler Building didn't just scrape the sky, it seduced it. But the race wasn't over. Just a few blocks away, another even more ambitious titan was rising, a project conceived in the heady optimism of the late 20s, but completed in the depths of the Great Depression. This was the Empire State Building. Finished in 1931, It soared to a staggering 1,250 feet, decisively stealing the title from Chrysler and holding it for nearly 4 decades. Its construction was a miracle of speed and efficiency. Built in just 410 days, thousands of workers labored through wind, snow, and steel dust, setting a pace that has never been matched for a project of its scale. The Empire State Building was a message. As much of the country struggled, Manhattan kept pushing upward. The building became a symbol of American resilience, a defiant gesture against economic despair. While it was an Art Deco masterpiece in its own right, its style was more restrained, more stately than the flamboyant Chrysler. Its beauty lay in its mass, its elegant setbacks, and its iconic mast. A quirky tidbit about this mast is that it was originally designed as a mooring mast for dirigibles, with the idea that wealthy transatlantic passengers could disembark from airships and step directly into the heart of Manhattan. This futuristic vision never came to pass as the high winds at that altitude made it far too dangerous. The mast instead became a base for broadcast antennas, a different kind of connection to the world. These Art Deco skyscrapers were built by barons and moguls who wanted more than just profit. They wanted legacy. They wanted a permanent, unmissable place in the skyline and in history. They weren't just functional office buildings. They were sculpted works of art designed to be beautiful from every angle, glowing at night like beacons of possibility. Historians still debate whether this skyscraper boom was a cause or a symptom of the speculative frenzy of the 1920s, but its result was undeniable. By the end of the 1930s, Manhattan's silhouette had taken its iconic shape. The city was no longer just a capital of finance, it was a cathedral of ambition, a skyline that didn't just whisper progress, it shouted it to the heavens. After the end of World War II, America emerged as an undisputed global superpower, and New York City became the front office of that new world order. The Manhattan skyline, always a mirror of the city's mood, entered a new phase. The ornamental, theatrical exuberance of Art Deco gave way to a cooler, more sober and distinctly corporate aesthetic. The new style was less about decorative spires and more about monuments to efficiency, power and international modernism. The skyline adapted, accordingly speaking, in a new language of glass, steel and straight lines. The first major statement of this new era rose not in the canyons of Wall Street or Midtown, but along the banks of the East River. The United Nations headquarters, completed in 1952, was a bold, slab-like glass tower, flanked by low, sweeping marble wings. It was designed by an international committee of architects, led by Wallace Harrison, and its design marked a definitive shift in tone. It was global, diplomatic, and self-consciously futuristic. It wasn't just a building, it was an architectural statement about a new era of international order in the atomic age, and its clean lines and glass curtain wall set the aesthetic tone for what would follow. Next came a pair of influential towers on Park Avenue that would define the look of corporate America for decades. First was Lever House, finished in 1952. It was a shimmering blue-green glass box that seemed to float above the street with a horizontal podium and a vertical slab. It was one of the first sealed glass towers in New York, with non-opening windows and a central air conditioning system. Just a few years later, in 1958, the Seagram building rose directly across the street. Designed by the master of modernism, Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, it is considered one of the finest examples of the international style. These towers were minimalist by design, stripped of all historical ornament and sentiment. They didn't aspire to look like cathedrals or castles. They looked like precisely engineered machines, ruthlessly practical and elegantly proportioned. The Seagram building was especially influential. A mainstream historical fact is that its design, with its bronze-tinted glass, its uniform grid of external mullions, and its generous open plaza at the front, became the template for countless corporate headquarters around the world. The plaza in particular was revolutionary setting. The building back from the street to create a public space, a grand gesture of civic-mindedness that also enhanced the tower's monumental presence. A quirky tidbit about its construction is that Mies van der Rohe was so obsessed with aesthetic perfection that he specified that the window blinds could only ever be set in one of 3 positions, fully open, halfway, or fully closed, to maintain the building's uniform appearance from the outside. As American businesses boomed in the post-war decades, So did the skyline, especially in Midtown. It became the undisputed hub for America's major corporations, banks, media companies, and law firms. These new skyscrapers didn't compete for the title of world's tallest, in the same way their Art Deco predecessors had. Instead, they competed for prestige for square footage, and for a commanding presence on the horizon. Gone were the soaring spires and whimsical gargoyles. In their place stood mirrored monoliths and anonymous glass giants that reflected not just the clouds, but the cool, calculated ambitions of Wall Street and Madison Avenue. Historians still debate the legacy of this era. Some see it as a period of soulless, cookie-cutter architecture that replaced the unique character of the city with a cold, corporate sameness. Others praise its elegant simplicity, its structural honesty, and its embrace of new technologies. But either way, in their cool silence and minimalist simplicity, these towers spoke volumes. They told the story of a country and a city obsessed with growth precision and a particular vision of modernity. They defined the corporate era, shaping the look and feel of cities across the globe. But even amid all this glass and steel, one thing remained true: the skyline was still a symbol. Only now it whispered power rather than shouting beauty. By the late 1960s, New York was already a vertical masterpiece, a city whose skyline was recognized the world over. The Empire State Building had reigned as the world's tallest for nearly 40 years, a seemingly untouchable icon. But the city still had room to dream bigger. That dream took shape not in Midtown, but at the southern tip of Manhattan in the old financial district. Here, a hugely ambitious and controversial project would soon rise a pair of identical towers that would alter the skyline, forever dwarfing everything around them and creating a new, powerful focal point. They were the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. Conceived in the post-war boom years as a grand urban renewal project, the World Trade Center was intended to revitalize Lower Manhattan and create a centralized hub for global commerce. The project was overseen by the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, a powerful bi-state agency. They chose architect Minoru Yamasaki to lead the design. Yamasaki, seeking to create a symbol of world peace and cooperation, opted for a radical minimalist approach. He envisioned two colossal identical square towers, free of the setbacks and decorative flourishes of older skyscrapers. They would be pure vertical lines clad in a skin of aluminum alloy, their immense scale being their primary aesthetic statement. Each tower would rise 110 stories over 360 feet, decisively taking the title of the world's tallest buildings. The ambition wasn't just architectural, it was ideological. This was to be a new kind of temple for capitalism, a statement of global connectivity and American economic might. Construction began in 1966, and it was a monumental undertaking. To make room for the 16-acre superblock, an entire neighborhood of narrow streets and electronics shops known as Radio Row was controversially seized and razed. The foundations were one of the most challenging engineering feats of the time. To excavate deep into the soft wet landfill of Lower Manhattan, while holding back the pressure of the Hudson River engineers, used a revolutionary technique known as the slurry wall. They dug a deep trench around the site, filling it with a slurry of clay and water to prevent collapse, and then built a massive reinforced concrete retaining wall from the top down. This bathtub allowed them to build the tower's foundations in a dry, secure environment. This is a mainstream historical fact that showcases the project's incredible engineering innovation. When the North Tower was completed in 1972 and the South Tower in 1973, they weren't universally loved. Some architectural critics called them sterile, boxy, or even boring. They lamented the loss of the ornate aspirational towers of the past. To them, the towers were simply two gigantic filing cabinets standing on the skyline. But to millions of others, the towers were pure presence. They were bold, confident, and utterly commanding. They didn't dance with the sky like the Chrysler Building, or taper elegantly like the Empire State. They stood firm, two unblinking, identical pillars of certainty and scale. More than just office buildings, the World Trade Center became an international symbol of business of New York and of American reach. People came from all over the world to visit the observation deck on the South Tower, to dine at the famous windows on the World Restaurant on the North Tower's 107th floor, or simply to stand in the vast plaza below and stare up in awe. A quirky tidbit that captured the public's imagination and helped humanize the towers was French high-wire artist Philippe Petit's illegal walk between the two buildings in 1974. For 45 minutes he danced on a wire strung between the two rooftops, a breathtaking act of artistic rebellion that transformed the towers from corporate monoliths into a magical stage. For nearly 3 decades, the Twin Towers dominated Lower Manhattan. They anchored the skyline, giving it a powerful symmetry and a sense of gravitas. And while other cities like Chicago would soon build taller structures, none carried the iconic weight of those two towers rising side by side at the gateway to the New World. The skyline had changed once again this time, not with artistry or ornament, but with sheer monumental ambition. On the clear, bright morning of September 11, 2001, the Manhattan skyline changed forever. It was not altered by cranes and construction, but by an act of unimaginable violence. In less than 2 hours between the first impact at 8:46 a.m. and the collapse of the second tower at 10:28 a.m., the twin pillars of the World Trade Center were erased from the sky, dissolving into a colossal cloud of dust smoke and twisted steel. Thousands of lives were lost in an instant, and the two structures that had defined Lower Manhattan for a generation were simply gone. The attack was not just an assault on people or buildings, it was a deliberate assault on symbols. It targeted what those towers stood for: global commerce, American power, modernity, and the bold ambition of the skyline itself. For decades, the Twin Towers had been the visual shorthand for New York City. Their clean, monolithic forms were instantly recognizable, printed on postcards, featured in films, and etched into the collective consciousness of the world. Now that skyline was brutally and irrevocably fractured. In the days, weeks, and months that followed, Lower Manhattan became a wound. The site, which came to be known as Ground Zero, was a smouldering 16-acre landscape of raw devastation. Where once there had been soaring height and light, there was only a profound and haunting absence. And that absence echoed across the city and the world. Photographs and film footage of the skyline suddenly looked hollow, incomplete. The familiar, balanced silhouette was broken. The space where the towers had once pulsed with global energy became a place of sorrow, silence, and recovery. For the first time in over a century, the story of the Manhattan skyline was not one of ascent. It was one of descent, of loss. The city grieved, but it also endured. In an incredible display of courage and resolve, firefighters, police officers, construction workers, and volunteers poured onto the pile, not to build, but to search and recover. The clang of iron once the sound of creation was replaced by the solemn sounds of rescue and the cutting of steel for removal. In a city famous for its relentless forward motion, this was a forced, agonizing pause. A long, deep breath held in collective pain and disbelief. This is a mainstream historical fact that is hard to comprehend. The sheer volume of debris was staggering. It took 9 months of round-the-clock work to clear the site, and yet even in the depths of sorrow, New York did what it has always done. It looked up. The discussions about rebuilding began almost immediately, and they were complicated, emotional, and fraught with political and personal turmoil. What should take the place of the towers? Should anything rise again on that sacred ground? How could the skyline be restored without erasing the memory of the immense loss? For years, the hole in the ground remained a powerful memorial in its own right, a reminder of what was and what was taken. A quirky and moving tidbit from this period was the tribute in light. On the 6-month anniversary of the attacks, and for many years after, 2 powerful beams of light were projected into the night sky from a spot near Ground Zero, recreating the ghostly outlines of the fallen towers. It was a simple, beautiful, and heartbreaking gesture, a temporary skyline made of pure light, honouring the absence while expressing a hope for renewal. Slowly, painstakingly, plans for the site began to emerge. Designs were drafted, debated, and redesigned. Cranes eventually returned. Steel began to rise again. It was a process not of erasing the tragedy, but of learning how to build something new alongside it. But before the first new beam was set in place, one truth had become crystal clear. The Manhattan skyline was no longer just a symbol of power or ambition. It had become a memorial, a silhouette shaped as much by triumph as by tragedy. And its story, though forever changed, was not over. In the aftermath of devastation, a city known for its speed, its ambition, and its relentless forward movement was forced to pause. But it did not surrender. It began to reimagine. Rebuilding the Manhattan skyline after 9/11 wasn't just a matter of architecture and engineering. It was a profound act of defining the city's identity for a new century. The question of what would rise in place of the Twin Towers was one that New York, and indeed the world, grappled with. Could anything truly replace them? The answer, which came slowly and carefully, was no. You don't replace a memory, you honor it, and you build a new future around it. In 2003, a master plan by architect Daniel Libeskind was selected for the new World Trade Center site. His vision was not simply about replacing lost office space. It was about creating a space for healing, for memory, and for renewal. The plan ingeniously blended commercial space with public memorials, a museum, a performing arts center, and a grand transportation hub, all woven into the fabric of the city. It wasn't a return to what had been. It was a statement of what could be. At the heart of this new vision stood a new single tower, One World Trade Center, originally called the Freedom Tower. During its conception, its design evolved into a sleek, elegant skyscraper. Rising from the northwest corner of the site, it would become the tallest building in the Western Hemisphere, reaching a symbolic height of 1,776 feet, a number chosen to echo the year of America's Declaration of Independence. This is a mainstream historical fact that imbued the building with national significance. But its design wasn't just about patriotic symbolism. It was about defiance, about the deeply human need to reach for the sky again, even in the face of immense loss. Construction began in 2006, and in 2014, One World Trade Center officially opened its doors. Clad in shimmering reflective glass and standing like a crystalline obelisk, it doesn't try to imitate the solid, muscular presence of the past. It offers something new, reflection, both literal and symbolic. Its tapering form means that from certain angles it appears to be a perfect, seamless triangle reminiscent of a monument. The building changes its character with the sky, at times glowing brightly, at others darkening, and sometimes almost seeming to disappear into the clouds. It is a powerful presence, without a hint of arrogance. Beside it, where the original towers once stood, lies the heart of the site's new soul. The 9/11 Memorial, opened in 2011, consists of two deep square reflecting pools that occupy the exact footprints of the Twin Towers. Water cascades continuously down their sides into a central void, a beautiful and poignant symbol of an absence that can never be filled. Etched into the bronze parapets surrounding the pools are the names of all the men, women and children who were lost in the attacks of 2001 and 1993. It is not just a part of the skyline, it is now a part of the city's sacred ground. The new skyline took years to fully take shape. Other towers rose around the memorial: 3 World Trade Center, 4 World Trade Center, and 7 World Trade Center, each one sleek, modern, and purposeful. Together, they form a new dynamic cluster of glass and steel, a neighborhood not just rebuilt, but completely transformed. New York didn't just replace what was lost, it evolved. It wove the memory of its deepest wound into its very fabric, honoring the past, while resolutely building for the future. And in doing so, it reminded the world of something deeply American and deeply human. You can knock a city down, but you cannot keep it from rising. The skyline once again was whole, but it was forever changed, carrying its history with a quiet, reflective grace. And so, our long journey through time and place comes to a gentle close. We have felt the searing sun of ancient Egypt, a land of grit and gods, where life was a daily struggle for survival under the watchful eye of a divine king. We have walked the silent, ghostly avenues of Teotihuacan, a city of mysterious power, cosmic alignment, and terrifying sacrifice, whose secrets are still being unearthed from beneath its stone pyramids. We followed the pulse of humanity's oldest instrument, the drum, from its primal origins in tribal circles to the thundering battlefields of empires, and finally into the digital heartbeat of our modern world. And we have watched a single iconic skyline rise against the odds, a testament to ambition and resilience, a silhouette of steel and glass that has been built, broken, and built anew. Each story in its own way is a reflection of the same human impulse to build, to connect, to understand our place in the cosmos, and to leave a mark that endures. From the pyramids of Giza to the towers of Manhattan, we have always reached for the heavens, seeking eternity in stone and steel. As you drift now into the quiet space of your own thoughts, let these stories fade into the background. Let the details blur, leaving only the soft echo of a distant drum, the faint warmth of a long-set sun, the silent gaze of a stone serpent. There is nothing left to analyze, nothing more to see. There is only the gentle rhythm of your own breathing, the simple, quiet peace of this moment. Let the journey end, and let your rest begin.